Hey there, tonight we're uncovering how Inuit hunters thrived amidst the pristine, yet unforgiving Arctic landscapes. What you're about to discover is the extraordinary ingenuity that turns icy desolation into a home. If these stories help you unwind, I'd love a quick like or subscribe, but only if they're genuinely working for you. I'm curious where in the world you're listening from, so drop your location and local time in the comments. It's amazing seeing our little community span the globe through these historical tales. Now settle in, maybe turn on some white noise or grab your favorite blanket, and let's drift into tonight's story together. The Arctic morning greets you with a biting whisper, a brisk reminder that you're living in a place where the weather has zero chill, literally. The temperature hovers around -40 degrees F, a mind-boggling number that makes you wonder if Mother Nature skipped her warm-up exercises. But you, as an Inuit hunter, are no stranger to these frosty embraces. The day begins in a snug igloo, your cozy fortress against the icy world outside. It's not just a random pile of snow, it's engineering brilliance. The walls curve to deflect wind and trap heat, maintaining a temperature about 40 degrees warmer than the outside. It's not a sauna, but compared to the outdoors, it might as well be the tropics. You slip into the day's first task, suiting up. Forget fashion week, this is survival week, and your runway look is all about keeping frostbite at bay. Your ensemble is pure Arctic chic, crafted with painstaking skill. The Inuit have perfected clothing design over centuries, using caribou and sealskin to create garments that are both lightweight and insulating. Caribou fur, with its hollow, heat-trapping hairs, is your secret weapon against the cold. Sealskin provides the waterproofing you need when the snow decides to melt a little, just to tease you. As you pull on your amori, a parka with a large hood designed to carry infants, you think of the thousands of years of trial and error that have gone into perfecting this attire. It's like having a personal heater that weighs practically nothing. Your boots, or kamiks, are made from seal or caribou skin, expertly tailored to keep your feet dry and warm. Fun fact: a good pair of kamiks can last several hunting seasons if you treat them right, which is essential when new materials aren't exactly an Amazon Prime order away. Now, let's talk tools. You grab your harpoon, an instrument that's evolved from a simple stick to a sophisticated weapon over millennia. The Inuit harpoon is a marvel of human ingenuity, combining bone, antler, and sinew to deliver a tool that's lethal against prey but harmless to the environment. Take that, single-use plastic. The detachable head, connected by a line, ensures that once you strike, you don't lose the catch. It's a classic case of using every part of the animal, a practice that's both sustainable and respectful. Stepping outside, you're hit with a fresh blast of Arctic air, invigorating as a double espresso shot. The landscape stretches before you in hues of white and blue, a stark, unforgiving beauty that demands respect. It's a reminder that the Arctic isn't just a pretty postcard, it's a challenging, often perilous environment. The Inuit have thrived here not because of some mystical connection to nature, but through sheer grit and adaptability. So let's bust that noble savage myth right now. It's not about living in harmony with nature because you want to, it's about doing so because you have to. Economic survival in this environment is as harsh as the weather. Trade networks are vital, offering access to resources not found locally, like iron for tools or wood for sleds. You might think of the Arctic as isolated, but even here, trade routes crisscross the ice, connecting communities over vast distances. Every tool and garment is a product of this interconnected web, a testament to human ingenuity and cooperation. As you trek across the frozen expanse, you're not just surviving, you're thriving. The Arctic is both a stage and a challenge, and you're playing the lead role in a story of resilience and resourcefulness. The sun is low in the sky, casting long shadows that dance across the snow. It's a reminder that daylight is a precious commodity here, and every moment counts. You take a deep breath, feeling the cold air fill your lungs, and set off on the hunt. The day has just begun, and the Arctic is waiting. The day stretches out before you, and as the sun peaks over the horizon, you gear up for the hunt with all the precision of a military operation. Preparation is key, and as an Inuit hunter, you're not just heading out on a whim, you're orchestrating a finely tuned dance with nature. Your first pit stop, the igloo, or as you might call it, the Arctic home base. It's not just a random snow dome where you crash after a long day. No, This bad boy is your strategic command center, your Arctic Batcave. Let's debunk the myth of the igloo being just a quaint little hut. Building one is like assembling a Lego set on expert mode, but with life or death stakes. Each block, cut from solid snow, is precisely angled and fitted. Think of it as the original prefab housing, only way cooler, literally and figuratively. The labor involved is no joke. It can take 5 hours of non-stop, freezing manual work to construct an igloo that can withstand the harshest gusts. But the payoff? A sturdy, insulated fortress that's as efficient as it is essential. And here's a fun fact to drop at your next trivia night. An igloo can raise the interior temperature to a balmy 20 degrees F while it's minus 40 degrees F outside. It's no Club Med, but it's a sizzling success in the Arctic. The igloo serves as a base camp for multiple hunters, a place where you can regroup, share intel, and maybe even enjoy a laugh or two over some fermented fish. Delicious or dubious, that's a story for another time. Now, let's talk transportation. No Uber or Lyft in these parts, but you've got something better. The iconic kayak and the trusty dog sled. Both are masterpieces of Inuit engineering, designed to tackle the unique challenges of the Arctic terrain. The kayak, often misrepresented as a leisure craft for thrill seekers, is actually the stealth bomber of the seas. It's sleek, crafted from a wooden frame covered in sealskin, and light enough to be carried on your back across icy patches. Building one is a labor of love, requiring weeks of work and meticulous attention to detail. But when you're gliding silently across frigid waters, you realize it's worth every blister and splinter. And don't let anyone tell you that dog sledding is just a quaint winter sport. That's like saying Formula One racing is just a Sunday drive. The sled, or Camutic, is your Arctic SUV, designed for durability and speed. Its construction is a communal affair, involving the entire family. Building a sled can take several days and a considerable amount of resources: wood, sinew, and seal fat for lubrication. The cost is high, but the reward is unparalleled mobility across the harshest landscapes. Let's not forget the dogs, your loyal teammates. They're not just cute furballs, they're your lifeline. An Inuit dog team is like a well-oiled machine, each dog trained for specific roles. Feeding them is a logistical feat, too. Fish, seal meat, and blubber are on the menu, and keeping them in top condition is a testament to your skills as a handler and provider. Pop culture loves to romanticize the image of the stoic Inuit hunter gliding effortlessly across the snow, but the reality is far grittier. Every journey is a gamble with the elements, and every tool is a product of painstaking effort. It's survival by any means necessary, not because of some mystical connection with the land, but because the land demands it. Speaking of pop culture, let's set the record straight. The Arctic isn't a frozen wasteland devoid of life. It's a bustling hub of activity, where trade networks flourish like the ancient Silk Road, only with more snow and less silk. Communities exchange goods, share resources, and build alliances, ensuring everyone has what they need to survive. This isn't some isolated, untouched paradise. It's a complex, interconnected web of human ingenuity. As you prepare for the hunt, you're acutely aware of the stakes. It's about feeding your family, yes, but also about maintaining the delicate balance with nature. You're not just a hunter, you're a steward of the land, ensuring its bounty for future generations. The Arctic is a demanding teacher, but you've learned its lessons well. With your gear ready and your team assembled, you set off into the white expanse, the crunch of snow beneath your feet marking the start of another day in this unforgiving landscape. The sun's arc across the sky is your clock, ticking away the precious daylight. But you're not worried. You've got the skills, the tools, and the determination to thrive in a place that demands nothing less. As you disappear into the horizon, you're not just surviving, you're living the ultimate adventure, one that's been unfolding for thousands of years, with you as the latest chapter. As you journey deeper into the Arctic wilderness, the snow crunching underfoot like a symphony of crisp potato chips, the mission is clear. Today's hunt is about seals, and if luck smiles on you, maybe even a whale. But let's squash that Hollywood image of the lone Inuit hunter, heroically braving the elements solo. The reality, it's more like a high-stakes group project where everyone knows their role, and nobody gets a free pass to slack off. First, let's dive into the world of seal hunting, an activity that's less about brute force and more about strategic finesse. The Inuit have been perfecting this craft for thousands of years, turning it into an art form. You're not just blindly spearing at shadows in the water. You're participating in a finely tuned game of patience and precision. Seal hunting involves watching for tiny air holes in the ice. Think of them as the Arctic version of a Starbucks drive-through for seals. Here, they pop up for a quick breath before diving back into the frigid depths. Your harpoon is at the ready, a marvel of engineering that's been honed over generations. When a seal finally surfaces, it's a test of nerve and skill. One quick, decisive throw, and you've got your catch. The average seal can weigh between 200 and 300 pounds, a hefty prize that promises to keep the community fed for days. But let's not forget the real MVPs here, your hunting partners. Each successful hunt is a communal victory, a testament to teamwork and coordination. It's like a well-rehearsed dance, with everyone playing their part to ensure the success of the hunt. Now, before we transition to whales, let's debunk that romantic notion of the solitary, rugged hunter. The Inuit aren't lone wolves. They're more of a wolf pack, relying on a complex social structure to thrive. Every hunt is a collective effort, with roles distributed based on skill, age, and experience. Elders pass down knowledge like prized family heirlooms, teaching younger generations the secrets of survival. It's an unbroken chain of wisdom that stretches back through the ages. And speaking of wisdom, let's talk whales, the giants of the Arctic seas. Hunting a whale isn't just a larger version of seal hunting. It's a logistical marvel akin to planning a military campaign. The bowhead whale, a favorite target, can weigh up to 100 tons and measure over 60 feet in length. This isn't just a hunt. It's an all-hands-on-deck operation. Imagine coordinating dozens of hunters, each in their kayak, maneuvering with the precision of synchronized swimmers to encircle the colossal creature. The harpoon, the trusty companion from seal hunting, is modified for the task, featuring a much larger detachable head and a line that can withstand the immense strength of a thrashing whale. Once struck, the battle is on, a tug-of-war with nature itself. It's a high-risk endeavor, but the rewards are immense. One whale can provide enough food and resources for an entire community for months. We're talking blubber for fuel, skin for tools, and meat for sustenance. It's a sustainable bonanza that, when done right, honors the animal's sacrifice. But here's where the rubber really hits the icy road: sharing practices. In the Inuit world, there's no room for greed. A successful hunt is a community affair, with the spoils distributed meticulously according to age-old customs. The hunter who makes the kill gets the first pick, but the rest is divided among families, ensuring no one goes without. It's a system that would make Robin Hood proud if Robin Hood traded in seals and whales instead of gold. This redistribution isn't just about survival. It's a social glue that binds the community together, fostering unity and cooperation. Let's put this into perspective with some numbers. A single bowhead whale can yield up to 20 tons of meat and blubber. That's the equivalent of around 40,000 quarter-pounder burgers, enough to keep a village in celebratory feasts for a long time. But it's not just about quantity, it's about respect. Inuit approach to hunting is steeped in a deep reverence for the creatures they pursue, a recognition that every life taken is a gift from nature to be honored and cherished. And while we're myth-busting, let's tackle the notion of the Inuit as isolated hermits cut off from the world. The Arctic has always been a hub of human activity, with trade routes crisscrossing the ice like a frozen superhighway. These networks facilitated the exchange of goods, ideas, and even stories, creating a vibrant tapestry of cultural exchange. From iron tools to decorative beads, the fruits of trade are woven into the fabric of Inuit life, a testament to their adaptability and resourcefulness. So, the next time you think of the Arctic, imagine not a barren wasteland, but a bustling marketplace where communities thrive through cooperation and ingenuity. It's a narrative as rich and layered as the ice itself, filled with tales of survival, innovation, and the enduring human spirit. And as you navigate this frozen world, one thing becomes clear. The Inuit aren't just surviving in the Arctic, they're mastering it, one seal and whale at a time. With the hunt over and the bounty secured, the return journey begins. There's a lightness in your step, a small victory against the odds, but the work is far from done. The real magic happens when the community comes together to process the catch, transforming raw meat and blubber into the essentials of life. It's a scene of organized chaos, with everyone pitching in, from elders to children, each playing a vital role in the dance of survival. The sun begins its slow descent, casting long shadows that stretch across the snow. It's a reminder of the relentless march of time, of the delicate balance between day and night, life and death. Yet, in this moment, there's a sense of accomplishment, of having played your part in a story that's been unfolding for millennia. As you settle in for the night, surrounded by the warmth of your community, you realize that this isn't just about surviving the Arctic, it's about thriving in it. It's a testament to the resilience and ingenuity of the Inuit, a people who have turned one of the harshest environments on Earth into a canvas for human triumph. And as the stars begin to twinkle overhead, you know that the adventure continues, with new challenges and new victories waiting just beyond the horizon. As the stars sprinkle the Arctic sky like a glittery confetti, the community buzzes with the energy of a new mission, processing the bounty of the day's hunt. The igloo, once a quiet bastion against the cold, transforms into a hive of activity, with the smells of fresh seal and whale meat mingling in the crisp air. It's a scene that would make a five-star kitchen blush with envy. Here, every slice of blubber, every cut of meat, is an exercise in precision and purpose. Now, let's get one thing straight. This isn't your average backyard BBQ. Processing a catch this size requires a level of organization that would rival a military operation. The community comes alive with the rhythm of knives against bone, the soft chatter of voices, and the occasional burst of laughter. A reminder that even in the harshest climates, a sense of humor is the best insulator. Elders wield their ulu knives, those crescent-shaped wonders of Inuit invention, with the grace of a maestro conducting an orchestra. These knives aren't just tools, they're extensions of the body honed through generations. And yes, you bet there's a system here, one as intricate as a Swiss watch. The meat is meticulously divided, with each cut serving a specific purpose. Blubber, rich in energy, is stored for fuel, a kind of Arctic power source that keeps the igloo toasty. The skin, durable and versatile, will be transformed into clothing or tools. Let's talk economics. Nothing goes to waste, and the idea of throwaway culture wouldn't just be frowned upon, it'd be laughed out of the igloo. The Inuit have been riding the zero-waste trend for centuries. Take that, modern minimalists. Speaking of economics, let's shift our gaze to the grand stage of Arctic trade networks, those frozen superhighways that connect communities across vast distances. Picture this. Long before the age of Amazon Prime, the Inuit were masters of logistics, moving goods like walrus ivory and baleen over hundreds of miles. These trade routes weren't just local gossip channels. They were lifelines, essential for survival in an environment that made no promises. A bit of historical name-dropping for you. The Thule people, ancestors of modern Inuit, were pioneers in this icy trade game. They built alliances, shared resources, and in doing so, crafted a sprawling economic network that spanned from the Alaskan coast to Greenland. You might say they were the original globalists, albeit with more seal blubber and less Wi-Fi. Let's not forget the practical genius behind these exchanges, trading a few pounds of walrus ivory, a high-value item, for much-needed iron tools or driftwood was the Arctic equivalent of a stock market trade. It's about leveraging what you have to get what you need, a dance as old as time itself. And while we're busting myths, let's tackle the romantic notion of the Inuit as noble isolationists. The reality, they were as cosmopolitan as it got for people living in the Arctic Circle. Trade wasn't just about goods. It was a social glue that kept communities interconnected, sharing knowledge as well as resources. Imagine swapping stories and techniques along with tusks and pelts. This exchange of culture and ideas is what kept the Inuit adaptable, nimble in the face of a changing world. Now, adaptability is the name of the game when it comes to thriving in an environment as unpredictable as the Arctic. Let's talk adaptation with a capital A. Climate change isn't just a buzzword for the Inuit, it's a lived reality. As the ice ebbs and flows, so too does the Inuit way of life. They've been practicing resilience long before it was a trendy hashtag, responding to shifts in weather patterns with a flexibility that would make a yogi envious. Take, for instance, the introduction of firearms in the 19th century. The Inuit didn't just adopt these new tools, they adapted them, blending traditional hunting techniques with modern technology to maximize efficiency. It's a classic case of evolve or dissolve, and the Inuit chose the former. And let's not romanticize this process. It wasn't a seamless transition. It was a complex negotiation between tradition and innovation, a balancing act on the edge of survival. But hold on, let's not skim over the social dynamics at play. The Inuit have always been about community first. Every decision, from how to split a seal to which trade routes to pursue, is made with the collective in mind. It's not about the individual hunter, but the survival of the group. This communal mentality is the bedrock of their resilience, a lesson in cooperation that modern society could take a page from. In a world that often glorifies the lone wolf, the Inuit remind us that sometimes it's the pack that prevails. Now, as the afternoon sun dips lower, casting a golden hue over the icy expanse, the distribution of the day's catch begins. This isn't a free-for-all. It's a ritual steeped in tradition and respect. The hunter who made the kill gets first dibs, sure, but the rest is divided according to a system that's as fair as it is ancient. It's a testament to the social fabric of the Inuit, where every member plays a role, and everyone gets a share. It's about as far from a dog-eat-dog world as you can get. Let's throw in some numbers for good measure. A well-executed hunt could yield enough resources to sustain a community of 50 for months. Meat is shared, skins are crafted into clothing, and bones are fashioned into tools. It's not just about survival. It's a celebration of life, a moment where the community comes together to honor the cycle of nature. And as the day winds down, there's a sense of accomplishment in the air, a collective sigh of relief that today, at least, the Arctic's demands have been met. The igloo, now filled with the warmth of shared stories and laughter, stands as a testament to the ingenuity and resilience of people who not only survive in one of the planet's harshest environments, but thrive in it. It's a story of cooperation and adaptability, of a community that never stops evolving. As the stars reclaim the sky, the community gathers for the evening, reflecting on the day's achievements. There's a comfort in knowing that, while the Arctic may be an unforgiving teacher, it's also a place of great beauty and opportunity for those willing to learn its lessons. The Inuit have carved out a life here, not through isolation, but through connection, not through dominance, but through respect. And as they settle in for the night, they carry forward the legacy of resilience and adaptability, ready to meet whatever challenges the next day might bring. As the stars reclaim their icy throne in the Arctic sky, the Inuit community gathers in the warm embrace of the igloo, the day's work done and dusted. It's time for the evening rituals, a blend of storytelling and reflection, a chance to unwind while knitting the fabric of their shared history tighter. This isn't just about swapping tales of daring hunts or impressive catches. It's a cultural mainstay, a moment where the past and present dance together around the flickering light of a seal oil lamp. Let's dive into the rich world of Inuit oral tradition, a storytelling marathon that would put even the most seasoned Netflix binge watcher to shame. These aren't your average bedtime stories. They're epic sagas, oral histories that preserve the collective memory of the people. Each tale is a mosaic of lessons, morals, and traditions, passed down like a verbal family heirloom. The elders, those esteemed keepers of wisdom, take the stage. Their voices rise and fall with the tales of Sedna, the sea goddess, or Kiviak, the eternal wanderer. Through these stories, the community learns not just about the past, but how to navigate the present and future. Let's bust a myth while we're at it. The idea that oral traditions are somehow inferior to written history. Not a chance. These tales are dynamic, evolving with each retelling to incorporate new lessons or adapt to changing circumstances. It's a narrative flexibility that would make a contortionist jealous. The stories serve as both entertainment and education, a reminder that while the Arctic might freeze your bones, it's the stories that warm your soul. Now, let's pull back the curtain on the evolving Inuit lifestyle, a narrative as complex as the Arctic landscape itself. Modern pressures are reshaping this ancient way of life, like tectonic plates under an ice sheet. Climate change, that relentless beast, is rewriting the rules of survival. As the ice retreats, so too do traditional hunting grounds, forcing the Inuit to adapt once again. The statistics are stark. Over the past 50 years, Arctic temperatures have risen at nearly twice the global average. It's like Mother Nature cranked up the thermostat without checking the bill. Economically, this is a seismic shift. The melting ice opens new shipping routes, and resource extraction opportunities, promising economic gains but also posing existential threats to traditional ways of life. The Inuit, ever the pragmatists, are navigating these waters with a blend of caution and opportunity. They're not just clinging to the past, they're forging a future, one that honors tradition while embracing innovation. Politically, the Inuit are taking a stand, asserting their rights and sovereignty over their ancestral lands. Organizations like the Inuit Circumpolar Council are bringing their voices to international forums, ensuring that any discussions about the Arctic include those who call it home. It's a powerful reminder that while the Arctic may be remote, it's far from isolated on the global stage. But let's not romanticize this struggle. It's a balancing act, a tightrope walk between preservation and progress. The influx of modern technology is both a blessing and a curse. Tools like GPS and rifles have revolutionized hunting, but they also risk eroding traditional knowledge systems. The challenge is to integrate these advancements without losing the cultural essence that has sustained the Inuit for millennia. It's a high-wire act with no safety net. But if history has taught us anything, it's that the Inuit are masters of adaptation. As the evening wears on, the stories give way to reflection, a moment to ponder the enduring image of the Inuit against the complex reality uncovered throughout the day. The romanticized vision of the stoic hunter, standing alone against the Arctic winds, is both alluring and misleading. The truth is far more nuanced, a tapestry woven from resilience, community, and an unyielding spirit. Let's wrap up with some sharp observations about legacy and significance. The Inuit story is one of survival against the odds, a testament to human ingenuity and the power of community. It's about carving out a life in one of the harshest environments on Earth, not through isolation, but through connection. The legacy of the Inuit is not just in their ability to endure, but in their capacity to thrive, to find hope and beauty in a world that often seems unforgiving. And here's a parting thought to chew on. The Arctic, with its vast expanses and silent beauty, is a mirror reflecting the human condition. It challenges us, tests our limits, and in doing so, reveals our true selves. The Inuit have shown us that survival is not just about physical endurance, but about the stories we tell, the connections we forge, and the legacy we leave behind. As the night deepens and the stars burn brightly overhead, the community drifts into sleep, cradled by the stories that bind them together. They know that tomorrow will bring new challenges and new opportunities, but they also know they are ready. For in the heart of the Arctic, where the cold winds blow and the ice stretches to the horizon, the spirit of the Inuit endures, undaunted, unbroken, and unyieldingly alive. If there's one thing the Ptolemaic dynasty knew how to do, it was family drama. Scratch that, they were pros at it. So let's zero in on Arsinoe, Roman IV, Cleopatra's sister, who's often overshadowed by her more famous sibling. Think of Arsinoe as the Jan Brady to Cleopatra's Marcia, caught in a royal ruckus where sibling rivalry came with daggers and poison, not just eye rolls and petty gossip. Arsinoe, Roman IV, was born around 63 BCE, growing up in a household where alliances were forged and shattered faster than you can say pharaoh. The Ptolemaic dynasty, which had been ruling Egypt since Alexander the Great's general, Ptolemy I, decided to set up shop there around 305 BCE, was notorious for its almost soap opera-like internal conflicts. Picture this, a family tree so twisted it could give a corkscrew a complex. It wasn't uncommon for siblings to marry each other just to keep the power in the family, and if things went south, well, the Ptolemies had a plan for that too, usually involving a swift exit via a dagger or a cup of something venomous. Arsinoe's early life was an education in survival, where she learned that trust was as rare as a snowstorm in the Sahara. Cleopatra and Arsinoe, despite sharing royal blood, were more like contestants in a reality show where the last one standing gets the kingdom. Growing up in Alexandria, the vibrant hub of culture and science, must have been fascinating, but for young Arsinoe, it was more about learning to navigate the treacherous waters of family politics than enjoying the city's famed libraries or debating philosophy with scholars. Sibling rivalry in the Ptolemaic dynasty wasn't your garden-variety squabble over who gets the last piece of cake. Oh no, this was a strategic game with real, often deadly, consequences. You see, Arsinoe wasn't just Cleopatra's sister. She was also a potential rival for the throne, and in a family where the crown was the ultimate prize, everyone was a threat. Arsinoe learned early on that alliances were as fleeting as the Nile's floodwaters, and she had to be as wily as a fox to stay one step ahead. The Ptolemies had a reputation for their, let's say, creative approach to familial relationships. Marriages were arranged with the precision of a military campaign designed to consolidate power and eliminate threats. It wasn't enough to just be born into the family. You had to prove your worth constantly. This wasn't exactly a nurturing environment for sisterly affection. Instead, it was a cutthroat arena where survival meant being cunning, strategic, and sometimes downright ruthless. Now, let's not pretend Arsinoe was just a helpless pawn in this game. She was a player, and she knew the stakes. Cleopatra might have been the more famous of the two, with her legendary romance with Julius Caesar and later Mark Antony, but Arsinoe was no wallflower. She had her own ambitions and wasn't about to let her sister's spotlight blind her. These sisters were like cats in a bag, each trying to claw their way to the top without getting scratched to death in the process. So, why the animosity between Arsinoe and Cleopatra? Well, it's like any good sibling rivalry, just dialed up to 11 with regal crowns on the line. Cleopatra was the elder sister, the one groomed for greatness, while Arsinoe was the younger sibling, often seen as second fiddle. But Arsinoe wasn't content with playing backup in Cleopatra's royal orchestra. She wanted her own solo, and in the world of Egyptian politics, that meant plotting, scheming, and sometimes allying with the Romans to tip the scales in her favor. Speaking of the Romans, they were the elephant in the room, or rather, the empire in the Mediterranean, that added a whole new layer to this sibling showdown. Rome had its eyes on Egypt, and the Ptolemies knew it. Cleopatra famously cozied up to Caesar, but Arsinoe had her own ideas. In a move that could have come straight out of a political thriller, she allied herself with the anti-Caesar faction, proving she was willing to make bold moves to secure her position. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Arsinoe's story is just getting started, and while Cleopatra may have had the more publicized romances and political maneuvers, Arsinoe's tale is equally riveting, filled with twists and turns that would make even the most seasoned Game of Thrones fan raise an eyebrow. So, stay tuned because the intrigue is just beginning, and in the world of the Ptolemies, you never know who might end up on the wrong end of a power struggle, or a sword. So, here we are, right in the thick of Alexandria's political circus, where Arsinoe Roman IV found herself not just a player, but a potential queen in the making. Alexandria wasn't just a city. It was the Las Vegas of the ancient world, a place where fortunes were made and lost, deals were struck in shadowy corners, and every alley whispered secrets that could topple a kingdom. For Arsinoe, navigating this urban jungle was like being on a tightrope with no safety net, and the stakes were about as high as the Pharaoh's lighthouse, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. Let's talk about Alexandria itself for a hot second. Founded by Alexander the Great in 331 BCE, this city was the crown jewel of the Mediterranean. It boasted a population of around 500,000 people by Arsinoe's time, which is a staggering number when you realize that's like cramming the entire population of modern-day Iceland into a city not much bigger than Manhattan. The city's bustling ports were the economic lifeblood of Egypt, bringing in goods like grain, papyrus, and those oh-so-precious Egyptian linens. But let's not forget the gold, literally. Egypt's wealth was one of the main reasons every Roman worth their salt was eyeing it like a hungry dog looks at a juicy steak. Economically, Arsinoe's time in Alexandria was a period of both prosperity and peril. Managing a kingdom wasn't just about sitting on a throne looking regal. It was about crunching numbers, balancing budgets, and ensuring that your lavish lifestyle didn't bankrupt the state. The Ptolemies were infamous for their extravagant spending. Cleopatra herself was rumored to have spent the equivalent of $20 million on a single banquet. You know, just a casual Tuesday night for royalty. But back to Arsinoe, who was playing her own game of thrones. While Cleopatra was off charming Julius Caesar with her wit, and let's be honest, probably her eyeliner too, Arsinoe was busy creating her own alliances. She wasn't about to let her sister hog all the Roman attention. Arsinoe had the support of the Egyptian populace, who saw her as a more traditional and potentially a more stable choice compared to Cleopatra's Roman entanglements. Staying on good terms with your own citizens was crucial, especially when your kingdom was a hotbed of Roman interests, Greek culture, and Egyptian tradition. Talk about a cultural cocktail. During this time, Arsinoe attempted to seize power in Alexandria, leveraging the city's complex political landscape to her advantage. She wasn't just a pawn, she was a queen in the making, maneuvering through a maze of intrigue and deception. She even managed to get herself declared pharaoh for a brief period. Yes, you heard that right. She wasn't content with just being in the royal family. She wanted the crown, the power, and the authority that came with it. Now, let's bust a myth or two. While movies and literature love to portray Arsinoe as the innocent victim in Cleopatra's quest for power, the reality was far more nuanced. Sure, Cleopatra might have been the one with the killer PR team, but Arsinoe wasn't exactly sitting around knitting. She was actively plotting, strategizing, and forming alliances with anyone who could help her cause, including the anti-Caesar faction in Rome. Forget the damsel in distress narrative. Arsinoe was a force to be reckoned with. But let's not sugarcoat it. Being a royal in Alexandria during this time was like walking through a minefield blindfolded. One wrong move and boom, you're history. Arsinoe had to navigate not just familial tensions, but also the ever-looming threat of Roman intervention. The Romans were the ultimate puppet masters, and their interests in Egypt were as much about strategic dominance as they were about that sweet grain supply that fed the Roman Empire. While Cleopatra played the long game with her romantic and political liaisons, Arsinoe was more about immediate results. Her approach was bold but risky. She even led a rebellion against the Roman forces in Alexandria, a gutsy move that demonstrated her willingness to fight for her claim. This wasn't just a power struggle with Cleopatra. It was a full-blown contest for the hearts and minds of the Alexandrian people and the control of Egypt itself. In this tumultuous environment, economic realities were never far from the minds of those in power. Maintaining a kingdom required resources, human, financial, and military. The Ptolemaic dynasty, despite its internal squabbles, was acutely aware of the economic engine that was Alexandria. The city's trade network stretched across the Mediterranean and deep into Africa and Asia, bringing in not just wealth, but also ideas, cultures, and occasionally chaos. Yet the allure of Alexandria was undeniable. It was a city where the vibrant mix of Greek, Egyptian, and Roman influences created a cultural melting pot that was as intoxicating as it was volatile. For Arsinoe, the challenge was not just to survive, but to thrive in this environment, to harness the city's resources and its people's loyalty to solidify her position. So, as we continue this journey with Arsinoe, remember that she wasn't just Cleopatra's sister. She was a decisive player in her own right. Her story is one of ambition, resilience, and the relentless pursuit of power in a world where the only constant was change. And trust me, the best, or perhaps the most dramatic, is yet to come. Stay tuned as we delve deeper into the tangled web of alliances, betrayals, and the ever-shifting sands of power in ancient Alexandria. Arsinoe's story is like a high-stakes chess game where every move could mean the difference between power and oblivion. While her sister Cleopatra was busy playing the Roman romance card, Arsinoe was crafting her own narrative, one that was less about seduction and more about strategy. Now, let's dive into the nitty-gritty of the Alexandrian War, where Arsinoe's ambitions took center stage, even if the historians often cast her in the shadows. The year was 48 BCE, and Alexandria was a cauldron of political tension hot enough to make a volcano seem like a kiddie pool. Julius Caesar was in town, not just to soak up the Egyptian sun, but to settle a little family feud between Cleopatra and her brother Ptolemy Roman 13. Enter Arsinoe, who saw the chaos as the perfect stage for her own power play. While Cleopatra was busy rolling out the red carpet for Caesar, Arsinoe was plotting her own red-letter day, seeking to carve out a legacy that wouldn't just be Cleopatra's footnote. The Alexandrian War wasn't your typical sibling squabble. It was a full-blown conflict with real stakes. Arsinoe allied herself with the Egyptian army and the local populace, who were less than thrilled about Roman interference. She even managed to escape from the royal palace, no small feat given Caesar's tight security, and joined forces with the rebel commander Achilles. This was a bold move, showing she wasn't just content with palace intrigue. She was ready to fight tooth and nail, quite literally, for her claim. Now, here's where the myth-busting comes in. Historically, Arsinoe has been painted as a mere pawn in the grand Roman-Egyptian chessboard, but the reality is she was more of a queen in her own right. Forget the damsel in distress narrative. Arsinoe took charge, rallying forces and leading troops during the siege of Alexandria. The fact that she held command, even for a brief time, challenges the notion of her being just a supporting character in Cleopatra's drama. But let's not pretend this was all smooth sailing. The siege was as brutal as it was strategic. Picture this. Alexandria's streets were filled with the clash of swords, the hiss of arrows, and the shouts of soldiers as the city became a battleground. Arsinoe's forces managed to trap Caesar's troops in the palace district, cutting off their supply lines. This was no small victory. It demonstrated her ability to lead and inspire in the face of overwhelming odds. Yet, while Arsinoe was making waves, Cleopatra was spinning tales. Her PR game was strong enough to overshadow Arsinoe's efforts. Cleopatra's alliances with powerful Roman figures like Caesar and later Mark Antony were the stuff of legend, and history loves a good love story. Arsinoe, on the other hand, was not writing sonnets. She was writing battle plans, a narrative less romantic, but no less compelling. The economic backdrop of this conflict was as complex as the political one. Egypt was Rome's breadbasket, supplying the grain that fed the Roman populace. Control over Egypt meant control over this crucial resource, making it a prize worth fighting for. Arsinoe's rebellion wasn't just a family affair. It was a challenge to Rome's economic interests. Her resistance was not just about personal power, but about national sovereignty in the face of imperial expansion. Yet, for all her efforts, Arsinoe's story was one of temporary triumphs. In 47 BCE, Caesar's reinforcements arrived, and the tide turned. Arsinoe was captured and paraded in Caesar's triumph in Rome, a public humiliation designed to showcase Roman dominance. But even in defeat, Arsinoe's legacy endured. Her resistance became a symbol of defiance against foreign domination, a narrative that resonated with those who saw Rome's encroaching power as a threat. So, why is Arsinoe often overshadowed by Cleopatra? It's simple. Cleopatra's story had all the elements of a blockbuster: romance, power, and tragedy. Arsinoe's tale, by contrast, was one of grit and determination, less glamorous but equally significant. Cleopatra's PR machine, aided by Roman historians who were more interested in scandal than substance, ensured that her sister's contributions were minimized. Yet, in the grand tapestry of history, Arsinoe's threads are crucial. Her story reminds us that history is not just written by the victors, but by those with the loudest and most alluring tales. And while Cleopatra's narrative might have dominated the headlines, Arsinoe's legacy as a formidable opponent and a symbol of resistance continues to intrigue us. She wasn't just Cleopatra's sister. She was a force in her own right, and her story is far from over. As we continue to unravel the intricate tapestry of Arsinoe's life, remember that history is full of complexities and contradictions. In the Ptolemaic dynasty, where sibling rivalry was as fierce as a Nile crocodile, Arsinoe dared to challenge the status quo. Her story is one of ambition, resilience, and the relentless pursuit of power, and it's a tale that deserves to be told in its entirety. Stay tuned, because the saga of Arsinoe Roman IV is a roller coaster of intrigue and ambition that still has a few twists left. Arsinoe's story may have been overshadowed by Cleopatra's epic PR and romantic escapades, but it was far from a footnote. When Arsinoe was captured and transported to Rome, her life took a turn that would have made any Roman playwright drool with creative envy. You know, the kind of plot twist that makes you spit out your drink in surprise, and then immediately want to dive into the next chapter. Picture this. It's 46 BCE and Arsinoe is being paraded through the streets of Rome in a triumph. But hold onto your laurel wreaths, because this wasn't your average victory parade. Nope, this was a full-on spectacle, complete with pomp, circumstance, and a healthy dose of humiliation. Imagine being the star of a show where the whole point is to showcase your defeat. Talk about a bad day at the office. Julius Caesar knew how to throw a party, and his triumph was no exception. The Roman triumph was the Super Bowl halftime show of the ancient world, a chance for victorious generals to strut their stuff, flaunt their spoils, and remind everyone just who was in charge. But while the Roman crowd was dazzled by the exotic sights and sounds of Egypt, elephants, golden statues, you name it, The real piece de resistance was Arsinoe herself. Here was a woman who had dared to challenge not just her sister, but the might of Rome itself. And now she was reduced to a mere exhibit, a living trophy paraded through the streets to the jeers of the Roman populace. It's the kind of public relations disaster that makes you appreciate your own bad hair days. But here's the kicker. Even in chains, Arsinoe maintained her dignity, refusing to bow to Caesar's whims. In a world where submission was often the only path to survival, Arsinoe's defiance was a bold statement. Now, you might be wondering why Caesar went to such lengths to parade Arsinoe around. Well, it wasn't just about showcasing Roman dominance, though that was certainly a part of it. This was a political statement, a reminder to both Rome and its subjects that no one, not even a Ptolemaic princess, was beyond the reach of Roman power. It was political theater at its finest, a masterclass in the art of intimidation. And boy, did it work. Yet, as much as this parade was a demonstration of Roman might, it also highlighted the absurdities of Roman politics. Here was a society that prided itself on its republican values, yet indulged in the most extravagant displays of imperial power. The triumph was a spectacle that laid bare the contradictions at the heart of Roman society. A republic that had become an empire, a city that worshipped freedom yet reveled in the subjugation of others. Talk about a political identity crisis. The social implications of Arsinoe's parade were equally profound. For the Roman public, this was a chance to see the exotic and the foreign up close, to witness the might of Rome in action. But it also served as a stark reminder of the ever-present threat of rebellion and the need for vigilance against Rome's enemies. Arsinoe was not just a vanquished foe. She was a symbol of the dangers that lay beyond Rome's borders, a reminder that the world was vast, dangerous, and perpetually on the brink of chaos. But let's not forget the economic undertones of this whole drama. Rome's interest in Egypt wasn't just about political control, it was about resources. Egypt's grain was the lifeblood of Rome, feeding its ever-growing population and keeping the mob at bay. By parading Arsinoe, Caesar was sending a message that Rome's breadbasket was firmly under his thumb, that the flow of grain, and with it, the city's stability, was secure. In the high-stakes game of ancient geopolitics, control of resources was as much about power as it was about survival. Arsinoe's public humiliation in Rome was a turning point not just for her, but for Roman-Egyptian relations. It underscored the precarious balance of power between two of the ancient world's greatest civilizations. For Rome, it was a reminder of the need for vigilance, and perhaps a bit of hubris. For Egypt, it was a stark illustration of the shifting sands of power, a reminder that even the mightiest can fall. But let's debunk a common myth, the notion that Arsinoe's parade was simply a tale of tragedy. While it was undoubtedly a low point in her life, it also cemented her legacy as a symbol of resistance. Her defiance, even in defeat, resonated with those who saw in her a beacon of hope against imperial oppression. In a world where history was written by the victors, Arsinoe's story stood as a testament to the power of the human spirit to endure, to resist, and to defy even in the face of overwhelming odds. Back in Alexandria, Arsinoe's capture and parade in Rome sent ripples through the political landscape. It was a reminder to Cleopatra and her supporters that Rome's reach was long, and its memory even longer. Cleopatra, ever the political strategist, knew that her sister's defeat was a warning as much as it was a victory. She understood that maintaining her own power required a delicate balancing act, a dance with Rome that required both charm and cunning. For Arsinoe, however, the parade marked the end of her public struggle, but not the end of her story. Though she was sidelined from the political stage, her legacy endured. She became a symbol of defiance, a reminder that power was never absolute, and that even the mightiest empire could be challenged. While Cleopatra's story may have captured the imagination of generations, Arsinoe's tale remains a compelling counterpoint, a story of grit, determination, and the indomitable will to stand tall even when the world would see you fall. As we prepare to dive into the final chapter of Arsinoe's life, remember that history is as much about the stories we tell as it is about the facts we know. Arsinoe's story is one of those rare tales that challenges our understanding of power, resistance, and the human capacity to endure. So, as we continue this journey, keep in mind that the story of Arsinoe Roman IV is far from over. Stay tuned for the next installment, where we'll explore the final twists and turns in the saga of a woman who dared to defy both her sister and an empire. Arsinoe's story, filled with twists and turns, as captivating as a Shakespearean tragedy, was barreling towards its final act. Yet, unlike the bard's tales where the hero's name echoes through eternity, Arsinoe's legacy was more of a whisper in the annals of history. Her final days were shrouded in the kind of political maneuvering that would make even Machiavelli drop his quill in amazement. After her public humiliation in Rome, Arsinoe was sent to the temple of Artemis at Ephesus, a grand sanctuary with more columns than an ancient Greek accounting ledger, where she was supposed to live out her days in exile. But let's not kid ourselves. Exile was just a fancy term for out of sight, out of mind. It was a gilded cage. Sure, but a cage nonetheless. Ephesus was no sleepy backwater, though. It was a bustling city, home to around 250,000 souls, and the temple itself was one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. A far cry from the dusty outcrop one might picture when thinking of exile, but for a woman who once dared to challenge Rome, it was a prison of another kind. Yet, Arsinoe's troubles were far from over. Cleopatra, ever the strategist with a Rolodex of Roman contacts, wasn't keen on any potential threats to her throne. And let's face it, her sister chilling out in a temple wasn't exactly the kind of loose end Cleopatra was comfortable with. So, in a move that would have made any Ptolemaic ancestor proud, Cleopatra persuaded Mark Antony to have Arsinoe eliminated. Who needs sibling rivalry when you have Roman muscle on speed dial? The deed was carried out in 41 BCE, right on the temple steps, which was a bold move, considering temples were generally considered safe zones. It's like ordering a hit in a church, definitely frowned upon in polite society. But in the cutthroat world of ancient politics, sanctity was often sacrificed at the altar of power. Arsinoe's execution was a stark reminder of the brutal calculus of dynastic politics, where family ties were as fragile as papyrus scrolls. But why does Arsinoe's story often get overshadowed by Cleopatra's glamorous saga? Well, Cleopatra had the kind of narrative that screamed Hollywood blockbuster. Her life was painted with broad strokes of romance, political intrigue, and tragic endings that were just begging for dramatic adaptation. Arsinoe's tale, on the other hand, was less about seduction and more about survival. She didn't have the luxury of crafting a narrative that would endure through time. Instead, her story was one of quiet defiance and resilience, qualities that don't always make for the juiciest headlines. Yet, in the modern reinterpretation of history, Arsinoe's legacy has found new life. She has become a symbol of resistance, a testament to the idea that even against insurmountable odds, one can stand tall. Her life is a reminder that history is full of layers, and the stories that endure are often those with the loudest voices, not necessarily the most deserving. Arsinoe's legacy also highlights the role of women in ancient politics. In an era dominated by male power, Arsinoe and Cleopatra were forces to be reckoned with. They navigated the treacherous waters of politics, not as passive players, but as active participants, shaping the course of empires. Their stories challenge the traditional narratives of female subservience in history, illustrating that women were often at the very heart of the political and social machinations of their time. The economic context of Arsinoe's life cannot be ignored either. Her struggle was not just a personal vendetta. It was a fight for resources and control. Egypt's wealth, its grain, its strategic location. These were the prizes for which Arsinoe and her contemporaries vied. Her story is a reminder that power is as much about economic control as it is about political dominance. In the grand chessboard of history, resources were the pawns, and those who controlled them held the keys to the kingdom. So, while Cleopatra's name might shine brighter in the history books, Arsinoe's tale is no less significant. It is a story of a woman who dared to challenge the status quo, who fought against the tides of destiny with every ounce of her being. In a world where history often favors the bold and the flamboyant, Arsinoe's quiet courage offers a compelling counterpoint. As we wrap up this journey through Arsinoe's life, it's worth pondering how history remembers us. Are we the tales that are told about us, or the truths that lie beneath? Arsinoe's legacy, though overshadowed, challenges us to look beyond the surface, to question the narratives that are handed down to us, and to seek the stories that matter. She may have been a footnote in the saga of Cleopatra, but in the Book of Resilience, Arsinoe wrote her own chapter. In the end, Arsinoe's life was a testament to the complexities of power, the intricacies of family dynamics, and the enduring human spirit. Her story, though often sidelined, is a reminder that history is not just about the victors, but about those who dared to stand up and be counted. So, as you drift off to sleep with these tales swirling in your mind, remember Arsinoe, a woman who dared to defy an empire and whose legacy continues to inspire. If you think family pressure is rough because your parents keep nudging you to become a lawyer or a doctor, just be thankful you weren't raised by Hamilcar Barca. This guy didn't just have high hopes for his kid, Hannibal. He had an enemy list, and Rome was at the top. You see, the young Hannibal didn't grow up with bedtime stories of heroes and fairies. He got tales of Roman treachery over warm milk and honey. Daddy Barca was a Carthaginian general with a grudge, and he was more than happy to pass that torch to his son. Hannibal's origin story is about as epic as they come. Born in 247 BCE in Carthage, he was practically swaddled in military maps. By the time he was 9, instead of playing hopscotch, he was supposedly making a blood oath against Rome at the altar of Baal. Hamilcar was off to conquer Spain, and little Hannibal begged to tag along. Like any reasonable father, Hamilcar decided that the best way to build character was to get his son to swear eternal enmity to Rome. Because nothing says, "I love you, son," like a lifelong vendetta. The Barcas were to Carthage what the Kardashians are to social media, omnipresent and influential. Hamilcar was a big deal, a seasoned general from the First Punic War, which, spoiler alert, didn't end well for Carthage. Rome snagged Sicily, and Carthage was left with a hefty war indemnity. But Hamilcar wasn't one to wallow in defeat. He took his talents and his family to Iberia, modern-day Spain, to rebuild Carthage's fortunes and plot a comeback. He laid the groundwork for an empire with good old-fashioned colonization and exploitation of the Iberian tribes, and he was pretty good at it too. Fast forward to 221 BCE. Hannibal is now 26, and life's about to get a whole lot more interesting. His father and brother-in-law are out of the picture. Hamilcar drowned in a river, and Hasdrubal the Fair got assassinated. So, guess who gets the keys to the family business? Yep, Hannibal. It was like getting the promotion of a lifetime, but with a side of intercontinental warfare. As commander of the Carthaginian forces in Iberia, Hannibal was ready to take his anti-Roman show on the road. Hannibal wasn't just some hot-headed young gun. He was a tactical genius with a flair for the dramatic. He knew that a head-on assault on Rome wasn't going to cut it, so he decided to think outside the box, literally. Instead of taking the sea route, which was crawling with Roman ships, he opted for the land route through the Alps. Now, this wasn't a stroll in the park. We're talking about dragging an entire army, including war elephants, over snowy peaks and treacherous terrain. But more on that in the next episode. Back in Iberia, Hannibal was busy flexing his military muscles. His early campaigns were impressive. He captured Saguntum, a Roman ally, in 219 BCE, effectively sticking his thumb in Rome's eye and saying, "Come at me, bro." This wasn't a random act of aggression. It was a calculated move to provoke Rome into declaring war, which they did. The Second Punic War was on, and Hannibal was ready to make history, or at least give the Romans a headache that would last for decades. Hannibal's early life was a cocktail of destiny, ambition, and probably more than a little bit of indoctrination. He wasn't just a product of his father's ambitions. He was a strategic thinker with a deep understanding of warfare and politics. But let's not paint him as some kind of ancient saint. Hannibal was ruthless, pragmatic, and not above a little brutality to achieve his goals. He was a man of his time, shaped by the cutthroat world of Mediterranean power politics. In the grand tapestry of history, Hannibal stands out as a larger-than-life character, not just for his military exploits, but for his sheer audacity. The guy didn't just think outside the box, he obliterated it. His early exploits set the stage for one of the most legendary military campaigns in history. But before Hannibal could become the stuff of legend, he had to survive the Alps and the wrath of Rome. And that's where we'll pick up next time, with elephants, mountains, and a whole lot of guts. So, Hannibal's out there, standing at the foot of the Alps, staring up at those jagged peaks like they're his Everest. Only he's not some lone adventurer with a GoPro. He's got a posse of about 50, troops, a cavalry, and wait for it, 37 elephants. You know, because nothing says, let's conquer Rome, quite like hauling a bunch of pachyderms over the mountains. Let's dive into what might be history's most audacious and bizarre logistical nightmare. First off, let's debunk the cozy notion that this was some kind of grand parade. We're talking about the Alps in winter, not exactly a walk in the park. The Roman historian Polybius gives us a rough sketch. Hannibal's army, a ragtag assembly of Libyans, Numidians, Iberians, and Gauls were trudging up steep slopes, probably cursing the day they signed up for this gig. Frostbite wasn't just a risk, it was practically a guarantee. You see, ancient thermals and snow boots weren't exactly in vogue. And avalanches. Yeah, those were more than just a plot point in disaster movies, they were a deadly reality. Now, about those elephants. We've all heard the tales of these majestic beasts stomping through snowdrifts like it's no big deal. The truth, it's a little less Disney and a bit more Darwin. Elephants are not exactly built for icy conditions. They're more Sahara than Switzerland. Of the 37 that started the journey, only a handful made it to Italy. Survival of the fittest, indeed, but not exactly a ringing endorsement for their suitability as Alpine warriors. So why the elephants? Besides the obvious intimidation factor, because let's face it, even seasoned Roman soldiers would need a change of tunics if they saw one of these behemoths charging at them. The elephants served as mobile siege towers, but the Alps, not their finest hour. Essentially, Hannibal was playing the psychological game, and it was a gamble that partially paid off. He knew that the sight of these creatures would send a powerful message. We're here, and we're not playing by your rules. The logistics of this journey were mind-boggling. Crossing the Alps wasn't just about dragging bodies over mountains. It was about sustaining them. Think of it as the world's first extreme camping trip, minus the marshmallows. The army had to forage for food, which wasn't exactly abundant amidst the rocks and snow. Starvation was a constant companion, and morale was as slippery as the icy paths. As for Hannibal, he wasn't just sitting back and barking orders. He was in the thick of it, rallying his troops, negotiating with local tribes, and finding ways around Roman blockades. This wasn't just a military campaign. It was a masterclass in leadership under duress. His ability to adapt, to use the terrain to his advantage, and to inspire his men was as crucial to his success as any battle plan. Let's not forget the economic context here. Carthage wasn't just sending Hannibal off with a good luck card and a pat on the back. This was a massive financial commitment, a high-stakes investment that could make or break the Carthaginian economy. The resources poured into this campaign were staggering. It wasn't just about manpower. It was about money, supplies, and the political will to keep it all going. Yet, for all the romanticism of Hannibal's daring, let's remember the grim realities. By the time he emerged from the Alps, his army had been decimated. Estimates suggest he lost nearly half of his troops, not to mention the majority of his elephants. It was a Pyrrhic victory in many ways, a testament to the thin line between boldness and folly. Now, why does all this matter? Because it was a game changer. Hannibal's crossing of the Alps wasn't just a military maneuver, it was a seismic shift in the Second Punic War. It forced Rome to fight on its own soil, something they hadn't expected. It showed the world that Rome wasn't invincible, and that audacity could topple even the mightiest of powers. As we leave Hannibal and his shivering army on the Italian side of the Alps, ready to wreak havoc on an unsuspecting Rome, let's pause to appreciate the sheer nerve it took to pull off such a feat. It was a bold chess move in the long game of Mediterranean dominance. But as we'll see, Hannibal's journey was far from over. Ahead lay battles, betrayals, and the cunning strategies that would cement his name in the annals of history. So, buckle up, because Hannibal's Italian adventure is just getting started. And so, with the Alps now behind him like a bad vacation memory, Hannibal didn't waste any time before getting down to the business of making Rome sweat. Let's fast forward a bit to the Battle of Cannae in 216 BCE, where Hannibal really put his strategic genius on display, like Da Vinci at an art fair, but with more blood and fewer sketchbooks. Now, Rome wasn't exactly rolling out the welcome mat. They were keen to show Hannibal the door, and by door, I mean a mass grave. Enter the Roman army, all 86,000 of them. They were the superpower equivalent of a modern-day military-industrial complex, armed to the teeth and ready for what they assumed would be a straightforward brawl. Rome was rich with resources and soldiers, the kind of empire that could lose a battle and shrug it off like a bad haircut. But Hannibal had other plans. Here's the kicker. Hannibal's crew was massively outnumbered, with only about 50,000 men under his command. But numbers aren't everything, folks. What Hannibal lacked in manpower, he made up for in sheer cunning. His plan was as audacious as it was brilliant, a tactical masterpiece that would make military strategists drool for centuries. Hannibal's strategy at Cannae was the classic pincer move, but on steroids. Imagine a crescent moon with Hannibal's troops positioned in a convex line. The Romans, thinking they were hot stuff, charged right in, eager to smash Hannibal's center. It was a classic Roman move. See enemy, charge enemy, conquer enemy. Simple, right? Wrong. As the Roman legions pushed forward, Hannibal's center gradually retreated, drawing the Romans deeper into the trap like a cat coaxing an unsuspecting mouse. Once the Romans were sufficiently surrounded, Hannibal's flanks swung in, enveloping the Romans in a double envelopment, or as the military nerds call it, a pincer movement. It was like watching an ancient world version of Gotcha. The Romans were squeezed tighter than a Black Friday crowd at a doorbuster sale. The result, a catastrophic loss for Rome. We're talking about 50,000 Roman soldiers cut down in a single day. That's like wiping out an entire city's worth of people before lunch. Rome's treasury took a hit too, as the financial strain of replenishing their legions and dealing with the loss of skilled veteran soldiers was immense. It wasn't just bodies in the field. It was a devastating blow to Rome's sense of invincibility. Economically, the Battle of Cannae was like a financial earthquake for the Roman Republic, shaking the very foundation of their military economy. Losing 50,000 men isn't just a statistic, it's a logistical and economic nightmare. Replacing soldiers costs money, and training them takes time, something Rome suddenly found itself short on. The Roman currency, the denarius, didn't just grow on olive trees after all. Politically, Rome was in disarray. The Senate, those toga-wearing power brokers, scrambling to figure out how to spin this disaster. The psychological impact on Rome was profound. The myth of Roman invincibility had been shattered, and Hannibal was now the boogeyman of the Mediterranean. Mothers probably warned their kids, behave, or Hannibal will get you. Hannibal, on the other hand, was riding high. He seemed invincible, like a military rock star whose name struck fear into the hearts of his enemies. But let's not get too carried away. The reality was, for all his brilliance at Cannae, Hannibal was still in enemy territory, far from home, and supplies were always a concern. Winning battles is one thing. Winning wars is another beast entirely. The legend of Hannibal as some kind of ancient superhero is tempting, but let's pull back the curtain. His victories were not just about battlefield prowess. They were the result of calculated risks, audacious tactics, and a healthy dose of luck. Sure, the man was a military genius, but he was also a gambler, each battle a roll of the dice with incredibly high stakes. As for the Romans, they learned a harsh lesson. Never underestimate the underdog, especially one with a knack for turning traditional tactics on their head. The defeat at Cannae was a wake-up call, a reminder that even the mightiest can fall. Rome would eventually adapt and regroup, learning from their mistakes, because if there's one thing the Romans were good at, it was bouncing back, like history's most determined rubber band. Cannae was a turning point, not just in the Second Punic War, but in the annals of military history. It was a testament to Hannibal's strategic brilliance and a sobering reminder of the unpredictability of warfare. But this was just one chapter in Hannibal's saga, a tale that would see more twists, betrayals, and battles, each with its own set of challenges and triumphs. As we leave Hannibal basking in the glory of his greatest victory, let's not forget the road ahead was fraught with peril. Victory at Cannae didn't mean victory in the war, and Hannibal knew it. The next steps would require more than just military might. It would take political savvy, resources, and perhaps a little bit of the luck that had brought him this far. So, stay tuned, because Hannibal's story is far from over, and the next chapter promises to be just as riveting. But Hannibal's victories were like sugar highs, intense but not sustainable. While he played the role of the crafty underdog, Rome was busy sharpening its claws and preparing for a comeback tour that would make any rock star envious. Enter Scipio Africanus, the Roman general with a plan to outwit the Carthaginian fox. Scipio wasn't just some up-and-coming rookie. He was a young prodigy with a resume that screamed future legend. In 210 BCE, at the ripe age of 25, Scipio took charge of the Roman forces in Spain, where Hannibal had left a trail of chaos. It was like being handed the keys to a car that had been driven off-road a few too many times. But Scipio, with his mix of charisma and tactical brilliance, turned it into a well-oiled machine. He recaptured New Carthage, modern-day Cartagena, in 209 BCE, a strategic masterstroke that sliced off a key supply line for Hannibal. Talk about cutting the legs out from under someone. While Scipio was busy making waves in Spain, Hannibal was, shall we say, not as fortunate. Sure, he was still giving the Romans a run for their denarii back in Italy, but his resources were dwindling faster than a sail on gladiator sandals. You see, Carthage wasn't exactly rolling in dough. The war effort was bleeding the economy dry, and without a steady influx of reinforcements or cash, Hannibal's campaign was like a fashion show without the latest trends, fading fast. To make matters worse, Carthage's political scene was a mess. Let's just say their Senate wasn't exactly winning any awards for most supportive government. Factional infighting, economic woes, and a reluctance to send more troops to Hannibal turned Carthage into a house of cards, teetering on collapse. They were like a band that couldn't decide on a set list, while Rome was tuning its instruments for a symphony of revenge. Hannibal, the strategic genius, was acutely aware of his precarious situation. He needed allies, and he needed them fast. His attempts to rally support from the Italian allies were about as successful as trying to organize a toga party in a nudist colony. Some local tribes did join his cause, but not in the numbers, or with the fervor he desperately needed. They were fair-weather friends, there for the victories, but quick to disappear when the going got tough. By the time 204 BCE rolled around, things were looking grimmer than a Roman Senate meeting after a military defeat. Enter Scipio once again, this time ready to take the fight to Africa itself. The Roman Senate, finally shaking off their post-Cannae PTSD, gave Scipio the green light to invade Carthaginian territory. With a force of about 30,000 men, Scipio landed in North Africa, aiming to hit Carthage where it hurt the most, right at home. Carthage, now facing the threat of invasion on its own soil, was forced into a desperate move. They recalled Hannibal from Italy, not so much as a hero's return, but as a last-ditch effort to save their skins. It was a move that said, "Hey, remember that guy we left hanging in Italy? Yeah, we kind of need him back." In 203 BCE, Hannibal left Italy, retreating with the remnants of his once mighty army, a shadow of its former self. The return to Carthage was bittersweet. For Hannibal, it must have felt like coming home to find your house ransacked and the neighbors squabbling over the last loaf of bread. The Carthaginian economy was on life support, drained by years of costly war. The political scene was a circus, with factions blaming each other for the dire straits they were in. It was less welcome home and more welcome to the Thunderdome. As Hannibal prepared to face Scipio on home turf, the stakes couldn't have been higher. This was the climax, the final showdown that would decide the fate of not just two generals, but two empires. The pressure was on for both men to deliver a decisive blow, the kind that would echo through the corridors of history. In the build-up to the Battle of Zama in 202 BCE, Hannibal scrambled to assemble an army that could match Scipio's forces. It was a tall order, like trying to put together a gourmet meal with a pantry full of scraps. He managed to gather a force of about 40,000, including war elephants, because hey, if you're going to go out, you might as well make it a spectacle. But Scipio was no fool. He'd studied Hannibal's tactics like a bookworm cramming for finals. He knew the elephants were as much a psychological weapon as a physical one. So, he devised a plan to neutralize them, creating lanes in his formation to funnel the beasts through, minimizing their impact and turning them into just another obstacle rather than the main event. The Battle of Zama was a chess match with real blood, sweat, and tears. Hannibal's forces fought valiantly, but the Carthaginian army was outmaneuvered, outflanked, and ultimately outdone by Roman discipline and Scipio's brilliant tactics. The elephants, meant to be the showstoppers, became the sideshow. It was a brutal confrontation, one that saw Carthage's hopes crumble like a poorly built sandcastle. The defeat at Zama was the final nail in Carthage's coffin. The economic pressures that had been building like a pressure cooker finally blew the lid off. Carthage was forced to sue for peace, and the terms were harsh. crippling indemnities, loss of territory, and the end of its status as a major Mediterranean power. Rome had won the Second Punic War, but the cost was immense, both in lives and in treasure. As for Hannibal, his story didn't end there. He became a statesman in Carthage, trying to rebuild what was left of his beloved city. But the Romans, ever wary of their old foe, kept a close eye on him. He became a political target, as Rome feared his potential to stir up trouble once more. Eventually, he went into exile, a wandering warrior without a home, a legend living in the shadow of his own myth. The Second Punic War was a turning point that reshaped the ancient world. It was a testament to the power of strategy, the strength of resolve, and the harsh reality of economic and political pressures that can make or break empires. Hannibal's audacity and brilliance would be remembered for centuries, a cautionary tale of how even the greatest minds can be undone by forces beyond their control. But let's not get caught up in the gloom. History is full of such stories, where the line between victory and defeat is as thin as a Roman coin. The gods of war are fickle, and fortunes can change as quickly as the winds on the Mediterranean. Hannibal's saga is a reminder that history is not just a record of events, but a complex narrative of human ambition, folly, and resilience. So, as we leave Hannibal's tale for now, remember that the echoes of these ancient battles still resonate today. They're not just stories of the past. They are reflections of the eternal human struggle for power, survival, and a place in the annals of history. And like all great stories, Hannibal's is not over yet. There's more to explore, more battles to fight, and more lessons to learn as we continue this epic journey through time. And so we find Hannibal, no longer the unstoppable force that once made Rome tremble, but a man of strategy thrust into the world of politics, a realm where the battles are fought with words and alliances rather than swords and elephants. Back in Carthage, his return was less of a hero's welcome and more akin to a firefighter walking back into a burning building with nothing but a garden hose. You see, Carthage was a shadow of its former self. The economy, gasping for air after the Second Punic War, had drained its coffers drier than a desert well. Hannibal, ever the problem solver, shifted gears from military genius to reformer, setting out to revive Carthage's fortunes from the inside. Hannibal's approach to politics was as audacious as his military campaigns. He initiated a series of economic reforms aimed at reducing the power of the oligarchs, those wealthy Carthaginian elites who had as much interest in change as a cat has in a bath. He tackled corruption head-on, slashing the bloated bureaucratic machine that had been siphoning off the city's wealth like a leaky barrel. By implementing a progressive tax system, Hannibal aimed to redistribute wealth more equitably, a move that must have made the Carthaginian one-percenters clutch their pearls in horror. But here's the kicker. While Hannibal was playing fiscal savior, Rome was watching with the intensity of a hawk eyeing a particularly juicy rabbit. They weren't exactly thrilled about Hannibal's political resurrection, fearing it might lead to a military one. So they did what any worried superpower might do. They spread rumors, fueled dissent, and generally made sure Hannibal's life was as comfortable as a bed of nails. The Roman Senate even went so far as to demand his extradition, accusing him of plotting against Rome. Because, of course, man who had spent most of his life trying to topple them would suddenly change his stripes, right? Faced with mounting pressure and the growing hostility of Carthaginian elites who preferred the status quo to Hannibal's radical reforms, our man found himself in a bit of a pickle. It was clear that sticking around was about as safe as juggling torches in a fireworks factory. So, in 195 BCE, Hannibal made the difficult decision to leave Carthage, entering a self-imposed exile that would see him become the ancient equivalent of a nomadic rock star, minus the groupies and pyrotechnics. His first stop was Tyre, the mother city of Carthage, a place where his name still carried weight. But Tyre was little more than a pit stop. Hannibal's journey continued across the Mediterranean, taking him to the court of Antiochus Roman III of the Seleucid Empire, where he became a military advisor. Now, if you're thinking, wait, isn't that like hiring a fox to guard the henhouse? You'd be right. Hannibal's presence alone was enough to make Rome break out in a cold sweat, prompting them to send an embassy to Antiochus, warning against any alliance with their old nemesis. Antiochus, not one to shy away from a little high-stakes chess with Rome, decided to make a move. But his ambitions outpaced his capabilities. the Seleucid War broke out, and despite Hannibal's strategic input, the Seleucids were no match for Rome's disciplined legions. The war ended in 188 BCE with the Treaty of Apamea, a peace accord that left Antiochus and his empire licking their wounds, and Hannibal once again looking for a new gig. Hannibal's final years were spent in the court of King Prusia's Eye of Bithynia, a small kingdom on the fringes of the Roman world. It was here that Hannibal's life took on the air of a tragicomedy. Imagine the once mighty general, now advising a king whose ambitions were limited to local skirmishes, and whose resources were barely enough to keep a fleet of fishing boats afloat. It was a far cry from the grand campaigns of his youth, more Shakespearean subplot than epic saga. And now, let's tackle one of the most enduring myths of Hannibal's life, his death. The romanticized version is that, cornered by Roman agents in Bithynia, Hannibal chose to take poison rather than face capture. It's the kind of dramatic exit that plays well in Hollywood, but the reality is a bit murkier. While ancient sources like Polybius and Livy report this story, it's worth noting that these accounts often came with a side of Roman embellishment. Hannibal's enemies were, after all, writing the history books. The truth is, we can't know for certain whether Hannibal's death was a calculated act of defiance or simply the result of natural causes exaggerated by the rumor mill. What we do know is that Hannibal's legacy was already cemented long before his final breath. He had become both a symbol of military genius and a cautionary tale about the perils of overambition, a man whose life was a testament to the unpredictable dance of fate and fortune. Ironically, Hannibal's story didn't end with him. His tactics and strategies continued to influence military thought for centuries. Roman generals studied his campaigns, eager to glean insights from the man who had brought Rome to its knees. Even today, his name is synonymous with daring and innovation, a reminder that sometimes the boldest moves are the ones that leave the most lasting marks. In the grand sweep of history, Hannibal's life is a mosaic of triumphs and tragedies, of audacious gambles and the harsh realities that often accompany them. His story captivates not because of its neat conclusions, but because of the complexity and contradictions it embodies. Hannibal was a man of his time, forged in the crucible of war and tempered by the relentless march of history. As we wrap up this odyssey through Hannibal's life, let's take a moment to appreciate the lessons it offers. In an era where power was measured by the strength of an army and the wealth of an empire, Hannibal showed that true might lies in the ability to adapt, innovate, and to challenge the status quo. He was a trailblazer, a rebel with a cause, and his legacy endures not just in the annals of military history, but in the very mindset of those who dare to dream big and defy convention. So, as you drift off to sleep, let Hannibal's tale inspire you to embrace the unexpected, to take risks, and to remember that sometimes the greatest battles are fought not on the fields of war, but in the arena of the human spirit. And who knows, perhaps there's a little bit of Hannibal in all of us, waiting to cross our own Alps and rewrite history. In the bustling streets of ancient Athens, where the air was thick with the scent of olive oil and political ambition, a man named Solon was about to make his mark, or at least try not to trip over his own toga. Solon, the Athenian statesman who had the kind of reputation that made both debtors and aristocrats break into a nervous sweat, was stepping onto a stage set by chaos. It was around 594 BC, and Athens was not exactly the serene cradle of democracy we like to romanticize. If anything, it was more like a high-stakes game of Monopoly where everyone owed everyone else, except instead of little green houses, they were dealing in shackles and servitude. Now, let's talk about this mess Solon inherited. Athens had found itself in a bit of a pickle. The economy was a hot mess, with debts piling up faster than Athenian ships at a port sail. Farmers, who made up a significant chunk of the population, were knee-deep in debt. And when I say knee-deep, I mean these poor souls were literally being sold into slavery to pay off what they owed. If you couldn't cough up the cash, you might find yourself or your family members working off that debt as slaves. Not exactly the kind of economic strategy you'd want in your portfolio. Meanwhile, the social fabric of Athens was fraying under the pressure of staggering inequality. The elite, a small group of aristocratic families, had a stranglehold on power that was tighter than a Spartan's grip on his spear. These guys weren't exactly popular at dinner parties. Unless you were one of them, sipping wine and debating which poor soul to foreclose on next. The gap between the rich and the poor was so wide, you could fit the entire Athenian fleet in it and still have room for a symposium. Enter Solon, the reluctant hero in this tale. He wasn't really the type to go charging in on a white horse, or whatever the Athenian equivalent of that was. In fact, Solon was more of a poet than a politician, a fact that might make you wonder how he ended up in this mess at all. It's like asking a Twitter poet to solve the national debt crisis. But his reputation as a fair-minded and wise man made him the ideal candidate to tackle the Herculean task of reforming Athens. Solon's journey to becoming a lawgiver was a bit like being drafted into a role he didn't exactly campaign for. He was chosen as archon, a sort of chief magistrate, by an Athens desperate for change but wary of revolutions. It was a delicate balance. One wrong move, and the whole city could go up in flames faster than you could say Acropolis. The key issue was economic reform, and Solon had to play the role of a financial wizard. He took bold steps to address the debt crisis. The first move, cancel all existing debts, just like that. It was called the sasach there, which roughly translates to shaking off of burdens. Imagine waking up one day and finding out your mortgage has been wiped clean. Sounds dreamy, right? Unless you're the lender, in which case you might be less thrilled. But Solon wasn't just about erasing debts. He also banned the practice of debt slavery. No longer could Athenians be sold into slavery because they couldn't pay up. This was a revolutionary change, and a significant step towards social justice, even if it did make the aristocracy grumble into their wine cups. With these reforms, Solon was trying to restore balance in a society teetering on the brink of collapse. He was like the ancient Greek version of a firefighter, extinguishing the flames of economic disaster. But let's not paint him as some unblemished hero. Solon's laws didn't satisfy everyone. The poor expected more radical redistribution of land, while the rich wanted less interference in their affairs. It was like trying to please both the fox and the hound at a single dinner party. Yet, despite the grumblings, Solon's reforms laid the groundwork for what would eventually blossom into Athenian democracy. He set the stage for a more equitable society, even if the immediate results were more akin to a truce than a peace treaty. Solon himself understood the delicate nature of his reforms, reportedly saying, "Laws are like spider webs. If some poor wretch comes up against them, he is caught, but a bigger man breaks through and escapes." So, here we have Solon, poet, philosopher, and reluctant lawgiver, caught in the whirlwind of Athens' transformation. As he navigated the treacherous waters of political reform, he managed to keep Athens afloat, steering it away from the rocks of civil unrest. His legacy would be debated for centuries, but in his time, Solon had done what few others could. He brought a measure of stability to a fractious city and laid down the foundations for something greater. Not bad for a guy who probably just wanted to write some poetry. Ah, the irony of Solon's situation. Like asking a fox to guard the henhouse, Athens turned to a wealthy merchant to solve a debt crisis. Solon, who likely knew more about trade routes and profit margins than the average Athenian farmer, decided to play the role of both doctor and patient in this economic triage. Enter the sasach there, his audacious move to wipe the slate clean. Think of it as the ancient equivalent of hitting Control-Alt-Delete on the entire debt system. This wasn't just a financial maneuver. It was more like a social defibrillator, aimed at jump-starting a city on the brink of cardiac arrest. Now, let's dissect this revolutionary move with the precision of a surgeon, or at least someone who stayed at a Holiday Inn Express last night. Solon's debt cancellation was a radical break from tradition, and not the sort of thing that wins you friends in high places, especially among the aristocrats who were probably planning to retire on those debts. Imagine you're sipping Ritsina at a gathering of Athens' elite, and suddenly your collateral evaporates faster than a puddle in the Athenian sun. It's safe to say Solon's invitations to posh symposia took a nosedive. But why did Solon, himself a man of means, choose to upset the rich apple cart? Simply put, he saw the writing on the wall, or rather, the etching on the marble. Athens was teetering on the precipice of revolt. Economic disparity was fueling a fire that threatened to engulf the city-state. By nixing debts and banning debt slavery, Solon was extinguishing the fuse, buying time for Athens to catch its breath. The economic ramifications were seismic. Suddenly, farmers who had been one bad harvest away from the auction block found themselves free from their shackles, figurative and literal. This wasn't just a release from debt, it was a liberation of human capital. Athens' fields, once worked by slaves, could now be tilled by free men. This shift not only rejuvenated the agricultural sector, but also infused the Athenian economy with a shot of adrenaline. However, let's not gloss over the fact that not everyone was toasting Solon's name with their morning wine. The elite, who had thrived under the old system, were left clutching their empty purses and muttering curses. Aristocrats like the Alcmeonidae weren't just losing money, they were losing power. Solon's reforms diluted their influence, redistributing it across a broader social spectrum. It was the kind of egalitarian move that made the rich see redder than a Spartan's cloak. Primary sources, like Plutarch, give us a glimpse into the reactions of the time. There was no shortage of grumbling, with some likening Solon to a madman who had thrown the city's ledger into chaos. Yet, despite the dissatisfaction among the upper crust, the reforms were largely embraced by the common folk. After all, who wouldn't cheer for a guy who just erased the chains of their servitude? Solon's actions, however, were not without their own brand of irony. Here was a wealthy merchant, a man who had profited from the system, now dismantling it in the name of justice. Perhaps Solon saw himself as a necessary hypocrite, wielding his own economic savvy to level the playing field. Or maybe it was his poetic side, yearning for a balance between the haves and have-nots. The debt cancellation wasn't just about numbers and ledgers. It was a psychological reset. It was about restoring dignity and hope to a populace battered by inequality. Solon understood that a city divided by debt was a city on the brink of disaster. By shaking off these burdens, he was rebuilding the foundation of Athenian society, one free debtor at a time. This seismic shift, however, was not without its aftershocks. As much as Solon's reforms were a balm for the poor, they were a bitter pill for the aristocracy. The social equilibrium had been disturbed, and the city was in a state of flux. Solon had done more than just cancel debts. He had set Athens on a path toward a new political order, a journey that would eventually lead to democracy. Yet, in the short term, it was like trying to balance a seesaw with one foot in the air. As the dust settled, Solon found himself in an unenviable position. Praised by some, vilified by others, he had become a symbol of change in a city grappling with its identity. His reforms were far from perfect, and he knew it, but they were a necessary step in a long journey towards stability and equity. In the end, Solon's sasach there was more than just an economic reset. It was a bold statement of intent. It was an acknowledgement that the old ways were unsustainable and that Athens needed to evolve or face ruin. Solon's legacy, like the man himself, was complex, part savior, part disruptor, and entirely human. And as Athens began to navigate its new reality, one thing was clear. Solon had definitely given them something to talk about. Solon's sasach there had set Athens abuzz, like bees stirred from their hive. But our poetic reformer wasn't done with his grand makeover of Athenian society. With debts shaken off and the social fabric given a good airing out, Solon turned his attention to the political sphere. His next act, a radical restructuring of Athens' political system that would have made even the most seasoned bureaucrats head spin. Picture ancient Athens as a ship navigating rocky waters, a vessel that had avoided capsizing but was still in desperate need of a competent crew. Solon, ever the pragmatist, saw that the city needed a system that could harness the energies and talents of its diverse populace. Enter the creation of the 4 property classes, a move that was less about reinventing the wheel and more about giving it a good, strategic shove. Solon's reforms divided Athenian citizens into 4 classes based on wealth and agricultural output, essentially turning the city's political landscape into a game of who's got the most wheat. At the top of this new hierarchy were the pentakosiomdimnoi, those who could produce 500 medimnoi of grain or its equivalent. These guys were the heavy hitters, the Jeff Bezos of the agrarian world, wielding significant political clout. Next came the hippes, producing 300-499 medimnoi. They were the knights, not just in shining armor, but also in shining wealth, as they could afford to maintain a horse for military service. Below them were the zeugeti, the middle class with 200-299 medimnoi to their name. They were the infantrymen, the backbone of the Athenian army, and now, thanks to Solon, a political force to be reckoned with. Finally, there were the Thetes, producing less than 200 medimnoi. The Thetes were like the guy at the party who only brought chips, yet Solon gave them a voice too, albeit a quieter one. They could participate in the assembly, which, as you might expect, was a bit like being invited to the big kids' table, but only being allowed to sit at the very end. By establishing these classes, Solon wasn't just shuffling the political deck. He was trying to ensure that every Athenian had a stake in the ship's journey. It was a bold attempt to balance power and privilege, a social contract inked in grain and sweat. But let's not forget the humor of it all. Solon was essentially asking the rich to share the sandbox with the less affluent, while still keeping his eye on the elite, as if they were the older siblings who might steal all the toys. You might think Solon's class system was a masterstroke of egalitarian genius, but it was more like rearranging deck chairs on a Titanic in shallow water. Sure, the ship wasn't sinking, but it was still scraping the seabed of inequality. Solon's reforms may have been groundbreaking, but they didn't exactly bring about a utopia. The rich still held the upper hand, and the poor were left hoping for trickle-down prosperity, a concept that seems to have plagued economists since the dawn of civilization. And then there was Solon's poetry. Poetry, his secret weapon in the battle for Athenian hearts and minds. Solon used his verses like a bard with a mission, crafting odes that sold his reforms with all the subtlety of a modern-day marketing campaign. He spoke of justice and balance, of peace and prosperity, weaving a narrative that made his political tinkering seem not only necessary, but downright noble. Solon's words echoed through the agora, his poetry giving a voice to his vision. It was like an ancient TED talk, with Solon as the keynote speaker, captivating his audience with both his reforms and his rhymes. His ability to blend art with politics was a stroke of genius, a way to communicate complex ideas in a manner that resonated even with those who had never seen a medimnos of grain in their lives. Yet, despite his innovative approach, not everyone was composing sonnets in Solon's honor. The elite, still smarting from the loss of their economic monopoly, viewed his reforms with suspicion. The poor, though grateful for their newfound freedoms, remained skeptical about how much their lives would truly change. Solon's system, while ingenious, was a compromise, a balancing act that tried to please everyone but left nobody entirely satisfied. As Athens adjusted to its new political reality, Solon remained a figure both revered and reviled, man who had dared to challenge the status quo, but who still had to reckon with the limitations of his own reforms. His restructuring of the political system was a step toward democracy, but it was a cautious one, hedged with the pragmatic understanding that radical change would require more than just a poet's pen. In the grand tapestry of Athenian history, Solon's reforms were a crucial thread, one that would guide Athens toward a future where citizens had a say in their governance. His legacy was like a seed planted in fertile soil, destined to grow into something greater, yet still vulnerable to the whims of the weather. And so, as Solon continued to navigate the turbulent waters of Athenian politics, he did so with the knowledge that his work was far from complete. The journey toward equality and justice was a long one, fraught with challenges and compromises. But in his heart, Solon knew that every step forward, no matter how small, was a step worth taking. In the grand tapestry of Athenian history, Solon's reforms were a crucial thread, one that would guide Athens toward a future where citizens had a say in their governance. His legacy was like a seed planted in fertile soil, destined to grow into something greater, yet still vulnerable to the whims of the weather. But Solon was only getting started with his ambitious makeover of Athens. After shaking up the economy and political structure, he turned his poetic eye to the realm of justice, where the stakes were as high as the Acropolis, but far less picturesque. Enter the Heliaea, Solon's brainchild that would become the birthplace of the modern jury system. Picture this: a ragtag assembly of average Athenians suddenly finding themselves with a gavel in one hand and the delicate scales of justice in the other. Solon's creation was a popular court, staffed not by elite judges cloaked in hoary robes, but by everyday citizens. We're talking bakers, farmers, and maybe even a few poets, because why not? The Heliaea was Solon's answer to the age-old problem of justice being a privilege of the few. Before this, legal decisions in Athens were often made by the aristocratic Areopagus Council, a group so exclusive they probably invented the toga party. Solon's reform opened the doors of justice wider than a temple on festival day, allowing citizens to be both judge and jury. It was like handing the keys of the city to the people, and what could possibly go wrong with that? Of course, the idea of empowering the average Athenian with legal recourse sounds like a democratic dream, but let's not kid ourselves. This was ancient Athens, not a constitutional convention. The Helii was less about impartial justice and more about who could sway the crowd's emotions. Imagine a courtroom drama where the outcome depended more on the orator's flair than the facts of the case. In this egalitarian experiment, citizens were often swayed by rhetoric that would make even the most seasoned politicians blush. The unintended consequences were both fascinating and downright comical. Suddenly, Athens was abuzz with amateur legal scholars, each citizen armed with a newfound zeal for justice, or at least their version of it. Imagine your neighbor, the olive farmer with a penchant for hyperbole, holding court and deciding your fate. It was like a legal circus, with each man competing to outshout the other. The city was alive with the sound of arguments, as Athenians found themselves embroiled in lawsuits as frequently as they were in philosophical debates. But there was a method to Solon's madness. By giving average Athenians a voice in the legal process, he was attempting to dilute the power of the aristocracy. It was a deft move, shifting the balance of power from the few to the many, or at least that was the plan. In reality, the Helii was as much about politics as it was about justice. It was an arena where personal vendettas could be settled under the guise of civic duty, a place where the eloquent flourished and the meek were drowned out like whispers in a storm. The Helii set the stage for future legal systems, but let's not get carried away with notions of early democracy. This was no egalitarian utopia. Participation required citizens to be male, free, and of age, criteria that excluded a significant chunk of the population. Women, slaves, and medics, foreigners living in Athens, were left on the sidelines, their fates decided by others. Solon's reforms were revolutionary, but they were still a product of their time, limited by the societal norms and prejudices of ancient Greece. Yet, even with its flaws, the Helii was a stepping stone toward a more participatory government. It was a bold experiment in self-governance, a precursor to the democratic institutions that would later define Athens. The court's influence extended far beyond its walls, shaping the very fabric of Athenian society. Legal dramas played out like soap operas in the agora, with citizens gathering to watch and weigh in on the outcomes. It was a civic engagement that would make any modern politician envious. The establishment of the Helii also forced Athenians to grapple with the concept of justice itself. Was it truly blind, or merely a tool to be wielded by those with the loudest voices? Solon understood the inherent chaos in his creation, but perhaps that was the point. By introducing a system where the common man could have his day in court, he was challenging the status quo and inviting Athens to redefine its own identity. As Athens stumbled through this new judicial landscape, it became clear that the path to justice was as rocky as the hills surrounding the city. Solon had set the wheels of change in motion, but the journey was far from over. The Helii was an ambitious start, but it would take centuries for the ideals of equality and fairness to fully take root, not just in Athens, but in societies around the world. So, as we continue our exploration of Solon's legacy, we find a city in flux, its citizens caught between the old ways and the promise of something new. Solon's judicial reforms were a testament to his vision, a daring attempt to bring justice to the people. Yet, like all revolutions, the outcome was uncertain, and the road ahead was fraught with challenges. But for Solon, that uncertainty was a small price to pay for the chance to transform Athens into a beacon of possibility. As Athens teetered on the brink of its new judicial horizon, Solon decided it was the perfect time to make his exit, a kind of ancient mic drop, if you will. Having played the role of political architect, economic reformer, and judicial innovator, Solon knew his work was done, at least for the moment. But here's the kicker. Rather than stick around to revel in his newfound rock star status, he chose to leave Athens altogether. Think of it as the ultimate in take a vacation to avoid meddling strategy, a lesson modern politicians might want to jot down. Solon's departure wasn't just a whimsical jaunt to explore the Mediterranean beaches. Oh no, this was a tactical move. By leaving Athens, Solon ensured his reforms could take root without his interference or the temptation to tweak things at the slightest sign of unrest. He was smart enough to know that the real test of his reforms would be how they fared in his absence. It's the kind of confidence you might expect from a man who'd just shaken up the status quo of one of the most influential city-states in history. And so, with a poetic flourish, Solon set sail, leaving Athens to ponder his legacy. Now, let's not get carried away with the idea of Solon as some democratic demigod. Sure, his reforms were instrumental in paving the way for democracy, but he wasn't exactly handing out ballots like candy at a festival. Solon's Athens was still far from the one-person, one-vote ideal we associate with democracy today. His system was more about preventing tyranny and establishing a semblance of fairness in a society that was still deeply hierarchical. The romanticism of Solon as the father of democracy is as appealing as it is misleading. He was a pioneer, sure, but he was also a pragmatist working with the tools and biases of his time. Critically examining Solon's legacy, we find a man who balanced idealism with a hefty dose of realism. He didn't promise utopia. He offered a path toward stability. His reforms provided a framework that allowed Athens to gradually evolve into the birthplace of democracy. It's like planting a garden knowing you might not be the one to harvest its fruits. Not exactly instant gratification, but a long-term investment in societal health. And while Solon's reforms weren't perfect, they were a significant step up from the oligarchic rule that had previously dominated Athens. Solon's greatest strength lay in his ability to see the bigger picture. He understood that political and economic systems are not static entities, but living organisms that need to adapt to survive. His reforms were not just about redistributing wealth or power. They were about creating a more resilient society capable of withstanding the inevitable storms of change. It's a lesson in governance that resonates even today, the importance of adaptability in an ever-changing world. As for modern politics, there are a few takeaways from Solon's balancing act. First, the importance of compromise. Solon knew he couldn't please everyone, but he aimed to create a system where the most voices could be heard, a lesson in managing expectations that some contemporary leaders might find useful. Second, the value of stepping back. Solon's decision to leave Athens after his reforms was a masterstroke in governance, allowing the system to stand on its own 2 feet. In today's political climate, where leaders often cling to power long past their prime, there's something to be learned from the art of knowing when to let go. In the end, Solon left behind a legacy as complex as the man himself, part visionary, part realist, entirely human. His reforms set the stage for the democratic ideals that would later flourish in Athens, but they were also a product of their time, limited by the constraints and prejudices of ancient Greek society. Solon's impact wasn't just felt in Athens. His ideas about governance, justice, and economic fairness would ripple through history, influencing political thought for centuries to come. So as we wrap up our journey through Solon's Athens, let's remember him not just as a lawgiver, but as a man who dared to dream of a better society. A society where justice wasn't just a privilege of the elite, where economic shackles were broken, and where political power was something to be shared, not hoarded. Solon's Athens was far from perfect, but it was a city on the move, a beacon of possibility in an ancient world. And that's a legacy worth celebrating, even as we continue to strive for the ideals he set in motion so long ago. If there's one thing history tells us, it's that empires are like that friend who insists they're just taking a break, but ends up never leaving the party. The Byzantine Empire, with its roots in the Roman Empire's more successful eastern half, was exactly that friend. When the Western Roman Empire finally threw in the towel in 476 AD, the Eastern Roman Empire, based in Constantinople, was just getting started. Think of it as the Roman Empire 2.0, streamlined, updated, and ready to mingle with the neighbors, especially those mysterious Slavs north of the Danube. So here's the setup. Rome collapses, Western Europe is left to stew in its own medieval chaos, but Constantinople is still throwing toga parties and serving up souvlaki. And why not? Sitting at the crossroads of Europe and Asia, the city was a bustling hub of trade, commerce, and culture, with a population of about 500,000 by the 6th century. It was a place where silk from China could bump into spices from India and whisper, "Hey, how you doing?" while gold coins jingled in merchants' pockets. Now, enter the Slavs, stage left. These folks were the original Eastern Europeans, wandering around the forests and plains of what's now Belarus, Ukraine, and parts of Russia, trying to figure out how to stay warm in winter without central heating. Their interactions with the Byzantines were initially limited, but like a Tinder match that just won't quit, the connection was inevitable. The Byzantines had stuff the Slavs wanted, like shiny trinkets, salt, which was basically gold dust back then, and most importantly, the good word of Orthodox Christianity. But let's not pretend this was all cumbaya and hand-holding. The Byzantines saw the Slavs as potential threats. However, they also saw them as a market just waiting to be tapped, and thus began a relationship that would shape the future of Eastern Europe, one trade caravan at a time. The Slavs came bearing furs, honey, and slaves. The irony of the word Slav isn't lost on anyone here, as it eventually morphed into slave in several languages. In return, they got a taste of Byzantine luxuries, and more importantly, their religious ideas. Religion, the original social network. Byzantine missionaries saw the Slavic lands as ripe for conversion. Enter Saints Cyril and Methodius in the 9th century, the dynamic duo of early Christian evangelism. They weren't just spreading the good news. They had a secret weapon, the Glagolitic alphabet, the precursor to Cyrillic, which they developed to translate the Bible into Slavonic. It's the ancient equivalent of creating a new operating system to better market your app. This wasn't just about religion. It was cultural imperialism with a side of alphabet soup. But let's rewind a bit, because this Byzantine Slavic bromance didn't start with church bells and holy texts. Trade was the initial spark that lit up this cross-cultural exchange. By the 6th century, Byzantine traders were regulars in Slav territory, and the Slavs, in turn, found their way into Byzantine lands. They even raided Constantinople a few times, just to keep things spicy. If you're keeping score, think of it as early medieval networking with a few sword fights thrown in. Meanwhile, the Byzantines were fortifying their borders like nervous parents installing CCTV cameras. They built the so-called Anastasian Wall in the late 5th century, stretching 56 kilometers to protect Constantinople from these enthusiastic northern visitors. But let's be honest, walls have a sketchy track record. The Great Wall didn't stop the Mongols, and the Anastasian Wall didn't keep out the Slavs. It was more like a polite suggestion than a serious deterrent. As trade flourished, the exchange wasn't just of goods, but ideas. The Slavs soaked up Byzantine culture like a sponge, adopting elements of their art, architecture, and even governance. It was like an ancient version of cultural osmosis. But let's not kid ourselves. This was a two-way street. The Byzantines weren't just benevolent cultural benefactors. They were shrewd operators, keenly aware of the benefits of having the Slavs on their side, or at least not on their bad side. By the time the 8th century rolled around, the Slavs were starting to organize themselves into what would become the first Slavic states. The Byzantine influence was clear, from the construction of fortified towns to the establishment of trade routes that mirrored those of the Byzantines. Slavs were like a teenager trying on new styles, picking what they liked from Byzantine culture while adding their unique flair. But let's not forget about the elephant, or rather, the horse, in the room, the introduction of horses and new agricultural practices. The Byzantines shared these with the Slavs, leading to increased agricultural production and, consequently, population growth. This was a game changer. With more mouths to feed, the Slavs turned into a formidable force, both culturally and militarily, setting the stage for future interactions and conflicts. As we wrap up this first act in the Byzantine Slavic saga, it's clear that while the Byzantine Empire was the more sophisticated and powerful entity, the Slavs were no mere passive recipients. They took what they learned and adapted it to their needs, setting the stage for a complex relationship that would shape the contours of Eastern Europe for centuries. This cultural exchange was not just about religion or trade. It was about survival, adaptation, and the relentless march of history. And much like any good tale of influence and interaction, it was only the beginning. And so we find ourselves at the dawn of an intricate dance of diplomacy and power, where the Byzantine Empire played geopolitical chess, while the Slavs were getting their own pieces in place. If you thought Game of Thrones had twists, just wait until you hear about how the Byzantines and Slavs maneuvered their way through the political quagmire of the early Middle Ages. The Byzantines, ever the shrewd operators, knew that keeping the Slavs as friendly neighbors, or at least neutral ones, was crucial. So they rolled out their playbook of alliances, buffer states, and of course, strategic marriages. First up, let's talk buffer states. The Byzantines loved these like a cat loves a sunbeam. Buffer states were the medieval version of a friendly bouncer at the door, keeping out the riffraff while maintaining a semblance of peace. These states provided a cushion between the Byzantine heartland and potential threats. Picture the Byzantine Empire as a nervous parent, constantly on the lookout for ways to keep the Slavic tribes at arm's length without outright hostility. The Bulgars, for instance, became a key buffer state in the 7th century, acting as both a shield and a conduit for Byzantine influence into Slavic lands. But what good's a buffer state if it's not rooted in some good old-fashioned marital diplomacy? The Byzantine Empire was like that matchmaking ant with an agenda. They sought out unions that would bind their neighbors to them. One of the most famous examples was the marriage of the Byzantine Emperor Constantine V's son to the daughter of the Bulgar Khan. This wasn't just a wedding. It was a strategic alliance wrapped in a white dress and vows. The idea was simple. A family that marries together, stays together, or at least doesn't invade each other as often. However, the Byzantine Empire's influence extended beyond political machinations. Let's talk trade, the real currency of power. Byzantine trade routes were the medieval Silk Road, and they reached deep into Slavic territories like veins pumping lifeblood into a burgeoning economy. The real magic was how these routes turned the Slavic regions into economic hotspots. Imagine bustling markets where Byzantine silk clashed with Slavic furs, and Byzantine coins were as coveted as front-row concert tickets today. Trade wasn't just about goods, it was about the movement of ideas and people. The Slavs weren't just passive players in this economic theater. They were active participants. As Byzantine merchants made their way into Slavic lands, they brought with them not only luxury items, but also the tantalizing allure of Byzantine culture and technology. The Slavs, in return, offered raw materials and slaves. Because, let's face it, human trafficking was a depressingly common aspect of ancient economies. The economic benefits were mutual, but not without tension. The Byzantine Slavic trade routes were like a popular Instagram feed. Everyone wanted a piece of the action, which inevitably led to competition and conflict. Certain Slavic tribes, growing increasingly wealthy and powerful, began to see the Byzantine Empire not just as a trade partner, but also as a rival. The Pechenegs and the Rus, for instance, often raided Byzantine territories, seeking to expand their own influence and wealth at the empire's expense. But here's the kicker. The Byzantines weren't just victims in these conflicts. They were experts at playing one tribe against another, using their economic clout and military might to keep the Slavs divided and thus more manageable. It's a classic case of divide and conquer, with the Byzantines ensuring that no single Slavic tribe could grow too powerful. The empire's strategic brilliance lay in its ability to maintain a delicate balance, a feat akin to juggling dynamite while blindfolded. Despite these tensions, the Byzantine-Slavic interactions were foundational in shaping the cultural landscape of Eastern Europe. Byzantine art, architecture, and administrative practices seeped into Slavic societies, influencing everything from the layout of their towns to the structure of their governments. This cultural exchange was not just a transfer of knowledge, it was a transformation, laying the groundwork for the Slavic states that would emerge in the centuries to come. Now, let's debunk a romantic myth, the idea that these interactions were purely benevolent cultural exchanges. Sure, the Byzantines spread their art and religion, but let's not kid ourselves. They had ulterior motives. By converting the Slavs to Orthodox Christianity, the Byzantines were effectively installing a spiritual firewall against Western Catholic influence. It was less about saving souls and more about securing influence. And speaking of influence, Byzantines weren't the only ones playing the long game. The Slavs were no mere puppets in this geopolitical theater. They were learning, adapting and growing stronger with every interaction. They took Byzantine ideas and made them their own, ensuring that when the time came, they would be ready to challenge the empire's dominance. So, as we pause in this ongoing saga, remember this. The Byzantine-Slavic relationship was a complex web of diplomacy, trade, and cultural exchange. It was a relationship built on mutual benefit, but also marred by conflict and competition. Empires rise and fall, but the dance of power and influence is eternal. And as the Slavs continued to grow in strength and sophistication, the stage was set for the next act in this historical drama. But that's a story for another time. As the story of the Byzantine-Slavic connection unfolds, one thing becomes clear. The Byzantines were master craftsmen in the art of influence, and nowhere was this more evident than in the creation and spread of the Cyrillic script. Picture this. It's the 9th century, and the Slavic world is like an uncarved block of marble, brimming with potential. Enter Saints Cyril and Methodius, the brotherly duo from Thessalonica, who didn't just walk the talk of spreading Christianity. They literally wrote the book on it, or at least the alphabet. Cyril, born Constantine, and his older brother Methodius were dispatched to the Slavic lands with the not-so-humble task of converting the masses to Orthodox Christianity. The brothers were like the dynamic tech startup of the medieval period, armed with a revolutionary product, the Glagolitic script. This was the precursor to Cyrillic, a script that would eventually become the backbone of Slavic literacy. Think of it as the linguistic equivalent of inventing the smartphone in a world of rotary phones. Now, why did the brothers bother to create a whole new alphabet? Here's where we debunk a common myth. It wasn't just about making the Bible accessible. Sure, translating religious texts into Slavonic was a big deal. What better way to win hearts and minds than by speaking to the people in their own tongue? But this was also a savvy move in the geopolitical chess game between East and West. By giving the Slavs their own script, the Byzantines were subtly nudging them into the Orthodox sphere, away from Rome's Latin grasp. It was cultural imperialism, wrapped up in the cozy guise of literacy. And let's talk about the script itself. The Glagolitic alphabet was a curious sight, with its looping, intricate letters. It was as if someone took Greek, shook it up with a bit of Hebrew, and added a dash of innovation. By the time Cyrillic emerged, it was streamlined, borrowing heavily from the Greek script, but tailored to the Slavic phonetic needs. This wasn't just about simplicity. It was about creating a tool that could outlast its creators. The influence of Cyril and Methodius didn't stop at the written word. These brothers were rock stars of their time, gaining followers like medieval influencers. When they arrived in Great Moravia, modern-day Czech Republic and Slovakia, they were welcomed by Prince Rastislav, who had been seeking a way to bolster his autonomy from the Frankish Empire. By introducing the Slavs to Orthodox Christianity and their very own alphabet, Cyril and Methodius were effectively laying the foundation for a distinct Slavic cultural identity. It was like handing a community the keys to its own narrative, allowing them to tell their stories in their own words. Of course, no good deed goes unpunished, and the brothers faced opposition from the Latin-leaning clergy in the region. The Frankish priests saw this new script and the Slavonic liturgy as a threat to their Latin hegemony. This led to a bit of ecclesiastical bickering, with Cyril and Methodius making a pilgrimage to Rome to defend their work. In a twist worthy of a political drama, Pope Adrian Roman II gave them his blessing, a strategic move that highlights the complex religious dynamics of the time. It was a nod to the growing importance of the Slavic world, and a reminder that even the Pope could play the Game of Thrones. But let's not forget the lasting impact of Byzantine architecture and art on the Slavic lands. As Byzantine influence spread, so did its aesthetic values, like a subtle but pervasive Instagram filter that makes everything look just a bit more sophisticated. Churches, monasteries, and fortifications began to sprout in Slavic territories, showcasing the distinctive Byzantine style with its domes, mosaics, and iconography. This was more than architectural flair. It was a statement of religious and cultural affiliation. Take, for instance, the Church of St. Sophia in Kiev, built in the 11th century. Its grand domes and lavish mosaics were direct nods to the Hagia Sophia in Constantinople, serving as a symbol of the burgeoning Kievan Rus power and its connection to the Byzantine world. The very stones of these buildings were infused with the spirit of Byzantine craftsmanship, telling stories of faith and empire. Yet this architectural influence was not a one-way street. The Slavs didn't just copy Byzantine designs, they adapted and evolved them. By the time the Novgorod and Pskov schools of architecture developed in the 12th century, they had a distinctly Slavic flair, with wooden structures and vibrant frescoes that spoke to the region's unique climate and cultural tastes. It was like Byzantine art had gone on a Slavic holiday, returning with a new wardrobe and a fresh outlook. This melding of Byzantine and Slavic elements wasn't just about aesthetics, it was a political and cultural statement. By adopting Byzantine architectural styles, the Slavs were signaling their allegiance to Orthodox Christianity and, by extension, to the Byzantine cultural sphere. It was a medieval version of keeping up with the Joneses, where the Joneses happened to be an empire renowned for its sophistication and spiritual authority. But let's circle back to the real power players, the everyday people. The spread of Orthodox Christianity and the Cyrillic script wasn't just top-down. It seeped into the very fabric of Slavic society. Local chieftains and rulers saw the benefits of aligning with the Byzantine Church, gaining legitimacy and a unifying religious framework that could bind disparate tribes into cohesive states. It was a bit like getting a corporate sponsor for your startup nation, providing not just spiritual guidance, but also a political playbook. And while we're myth-busting, let's tackle the notion that the Slavs were passive recipients of Byzantine culture. Far from it. They were active participants in this cultural exchange, picking and choosing elements that resonated with their own traditions and rejecting those that didn't. It was less about imitation and more about transformation, creating something uniquely Slavic out of the Byzantine influence. So, as we leave this chapter in the Byzantine Slavic saga, remember that the story isn't just about alphabets and architecture. It's about the complex interplay of religion, culture, and power that shaped an entire region. The Slavs weren't just influenced by the Byzantines. They were partners in a cultural dance that would have lasting repercussions for centuries. As the Byzantine Empire spread its wings, the Slavic world was ready to soar alongside it, creating a legacy that would echo across the ages. But hold that thought, because there's plenty more intrigue and evolution to come in the next installment of our historical adventure. As the Byzantine Empire spread its wings, the Slavic world was ready to soar alongside it, creating a legacy that would echo across the ages. But let's pump the brakes for a moment and dive into a topic that's been glossed over like a bad haircut in a family photo, the so-called Byzantine Golden Age. Now, if you've ever heard of this Golden Age, you think the Byzantines were living in a land of milk and honey, where everyone wore silk robes and sipped wine in marble palaces. But let's get real. Beneath that shimmering facade was a bubbling cauldron of administrative headaches, military debacles, and enough internal strife to make a soap opera look like a Sunday picnic. First up, let's tackle the myth of Byzantine opulence. Yes, Constantinople was a dazzling city, replete with its Hagia Sophia and bustling markets. But all that glamour came at a price. Those gold mosaics and ornate churches weren't just there for aesthetic pleasure. They were the Byzantine way of flexing on everyone else, a bit like that friend who insists on showing off their latest designer handbag. And while the empire projected an image of endless wealth, the reality was that it was teetering on the edge of financial crisis more often than not. By the 11th century, the Byzantine economy was a tangled web of taxation and corruption. Emperors like Basil Roman II, known as the Bulgar Slayer, and no, that's not his wrestling name, might have filled the coffers with the spoils of war, but maintaining an empire wasn't cheap. Byzantine bureaucrats were practically inventing new taxes just to keep the lights on. And speaking of taxes, let's not forget the pronoia system. This was the empire's version of a Kickstarter campaign, granting land to military officers in exchange for their services. On paper, it was a brilliant idea. In practice, it was more like handing out IOUs at a poker game. Eventually, someone's going to call in the debt. And military might. Let's just say the Byzantine army had its fair share of bad days. Sure, there were triumphs like the victory at Claudion in 1014, where Basil Roman II blinded 15,000 Bulgarian prisoners, sending them home in a grim display of power. But for every win, there seemed to be a loss waiting in the wings. The Battle of Manzikert in 1071 was one such disaster. where the Byzantine forces were routed by the Seljuk Turks, and Emperor Romano's Roman IV Diogenes was captured. It was a wake-up call that the empire's glory days weren't as golden as they seemed. Internally, the Byzantine Empire was like a reality TV show with a revolving cast of emperors, each trying to outdo the other in a never-ending quest for control. Factionalism was rife, with noble families and court officials playing power games that would make Machiavelli proud. The Macedonian dynasty, for instance, was constantly under threat from rival claimants and scheming eunuchs, a group that wielded surprising power in the Byzantine court. These palace intrigues were less about governance and more about survival, with emperors being blinded or exiled at the drop of a hat. Then there was the little matter of religious conflict. The Byzantine Empire was a hotbed of theological debate, with disputes often turning nasty. The iconoclast controversy, which raged from the 8th to the 9th centuries, saw emperors banning the veneration of icons, sparking riots and rebellions. It was a clash of faiths that tore families apart and divided communities, a reminder that even in an age that glorified saints and martyrs, religious unity was more of a pipe dream than a reality. But let's not get too bogged down in the doom and gloom. The Byzantine Empire was a master of reinvention, bouncing back from setbacks with the resilience of a rubber band. When the going got tough, the Byzantines got creative. They developed the theme system, which reorganized the empire into military districts to better defend against external threats. And let's not forget the use of Greek fire, a mysterious incendiary weapon that could burn on water, striking fear into the hearts of enemy navies. This wasn't just warfare, it was pyrotechnics with a side of terror. Despite its challenges, the Byzantine Empire remained a cultural powerhouse, its influence reverberating through art, literature, and law. The Corpus Juris Civilis, Justinian's grand codification of Roman law, was a cornerstone of Byzantine legal tradition, influencing legal systems across Europe for centuries. And while the empire might have been a political hot mess, its scholars and theologians were producing works that would inspire generations. So, when we talk about the Byzantine Golden Age, let's remember that it was less of a utopia and more of a balancing act on a high wire, with all the grace and peril that entails. The empire wasn't just a tale of opulence and splendor. It was a saga of survival, innovation, and relentless ambition. The Byzantines were masters of the long game, navigating the choppy waters of history with a blend of cunning and resilience. As we draw to a close on this chapter, it's clear that the Byzantine Empire was a paradox, a realm of contradictions where splendor and squalor walked hand in hand. It was a place where the past and future coexisted, where ancient traditions met innovative ideas, and where the power plays of emperors and generals shaped the fate of nations. And while the empire's influence on the Slavic world was profound, it was but one chapter in a much larger story. So, hold onto your hats, because there's more intrigue and evolution awaiting in the next installment of our historical adventure. As we sail into the final act of this Byzantine Slavic thriller, let's consider the legacy of their cultural tango, how this medieval power couple left a mark so deep it still echoes through the corridors of modern Eastern Europe. You see, the Byzantine-Slavic relationship was like a historical smoothie, an eclectic mix of influences, shaken, not stirred, and poured generously over the Slavic lands. First up, let's talk religion. By the time the Byzantine Empire was done spreading Orthodox Christianity like medieval wildfire, the Slavs had swapped their pagan bonfires for church candles. This wasn't just a change in worship. It was the installation of a new operating system. Orthodox Christianity became the spiritual backbone of the Kievan Rus, which, in case you're wondering, is the historical precursor to modern-day Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus. Fast forward to today, and you'll find that Russia still holds the title of the largest Orthodox Christian nation, with over 100 million adherents. The ripple effects of Byzantine evangelism are as tangible as ever, with Orthodox Christianity serving as a cultural touchstone, a unifying identity amid the post-Soviet complexity. Now, let's not ignore the elephant in the room, language. The creation of the Cyrillic script was like giving the Slavs a cultural megaphone. It wasn't just about translating religious texts. It was about giving a voice to an entire people. Today, Cyrillic is the writing system used in over 50 languages, including Russian, Bulgarian, and Serbian. It's as if Saint Cyril and Methodius handed the Slavs a linguistic toolkit that helped shape national identities across Eastern Europe. Talk about an enduring legacy. These letters are still doing the heavy lifting in everything from love letters to legal documents. Speaking of cultural exchange, Byzantine art and architecture left an indelible imprint on the Slavic aesthetic. The domes and crosses that define the skylines of Eastern Europe owe a nod to Byzantine influences. Take the Cathedral of St. Sava in Belgrade, Serbia. Although completed in the 21st century, its design echoes the Byzantine style, a nod to the architectural DNA passed down through generations. This isn't just a matter of style. It's a visual history lesson, a reminder of the days when Byzantine artisans were the rock stars of the medieval world. Now, let's sprinkle in a bit of political intrigue. The Byzantine influence on Slavic governance was like teaching a teenager to drive, nerve-wracking, but ultimately transformative. Byzantine administrative practices seeped into the burgeoning Slavic states, setting the stage for the rise of centralized power structures. The Grand Principality of Moscow, which eventually morphed into the Russian Empire, borrowed heavily from Byzantine court ceremonies and governance. Even today, the pomp and circumstance surrounding Russian state events have echoes of Byzantine grandeur, minus the togas, of course. But here's a juicy tidbit. The Byzantines didn't just export culture, they imported too. The Slavs brought with them a certain rugged practicality, an ability to adapt and endure that impressed even the most jaded Byzantine bureaucrat. This cross-pollination of ideas was a two-way street, with both cultures emerging richer and more resilient. It's like the Byzantines handed the Slavs a cultural paintbrush, and the Slavs painted their own history with Byzantine colors. Let's not sugarcoat it, though the Byzantine-Slavic relationship had its fair share of friction. The Byzantines were masters at playing divide and conquer, using their influence to keep Slavic tribes from uniting against them. This wasn't just diplomatic finesse, it was survival strategy 101. Yet, through this dance of diplomacy and power, the Slavs learned the art of statecraft, eventually uniting under leaders like Prince Vladimir of Kiev. His conversion to Christianity in 988 AD was a pivotal moment, not just a spiritual shift, but a strategic alignment with Byzantine power, a move that positioned the Kievan Rus as a major player on the European stage. By the time the Byzantine Empire breathed its last in 1453, the seeds it had planted in the Slavic world were flourishing. The fall of Constantinople might have marked the end of Byzantine political power, but its cultural legacy was far from buried. The Russian Tsardom, for instance, adopted the mantle of the Third Rome, seeing itself as the rightful successor to Byzantine glory. This wasn't just a political claim, it was a cultural aspiration, a testament to the enduring influence of Byzantium on Slavic identity. As we wrap up this historical saga, it's worth pondering the broader implications. The Byzantine-Slavic interplay wasn't just a medieval affair, it was a foundational chapter in the story of Europe. It shaped borders, forged alliances, and sowed the seeds of modern nations. The echoes of this ancient partnership resonate in the cathedrals of Moscow, the alphabets of Sofia, and the cultural traditions of Belgrade. It's a legacy that reminds us that history isn't just a series of events. It's a tapestry woven from the threads of countless interactions, each one contributing to the rich, complex pattern we see today. So, as you drift off to sleep with this new knowledge tucked away, remember this. The Byzantine-Slavic relationship was more than a historical footnote. It was a transformative force, a cultural catalyst that continues to shape our world in ways both seen and unseen. And while empires may rise and fall, their legacies endure, carried forward by the people and cultures they touched. In the grand tapestry of history, the threads of Byzantium and the Slavs are woven tightly together, a testament to the enduring power of cultural exchange and human ingenuity. The tale of Christopher Columbus doesn't begin with the swaggering captain you might imagine, but rather with a young boy in Genoa trying to make sense of a world much larger than his family's modest wool-weaving shop. Born in 1451, Columbus wasn't exactly destined for greatness from day one. Genoa, an Italian city-state bustling with merchants and mariners, was the perfect breeding ground for ambition. But young Cristoforo, as he was known in his native tongue, had a few things working against him. For starters, his math skills were about as reliable as a paper compass in a storm. In a city where the scent of sea salt and opportunity filled the air, the maritime culture was inescapable. Ships came and went, whispering promises of distant lands and riches. The economy of Genoa thrived on trade routes that stretched their fingers across the Mediterranean and beyond. And while others might have seen the sea as merely a way to ferry goods, Columbus saw it as the path to glory. But let's not kid ourselves. His navigational theories were a bit more innovative than accurate. Now, Columbus wasn't exactly the child prodigy of the Genoese educational system. Imagine a classroom where he's scribbling figures that don't quite add up, his calculations leading him to believe Asia was just a quick hop across the Atlantic. His teachers might have chuckled, but Columbus had a knack for turning wild ideas into enthusiastic monologues. It's like he never met an audience he couldn't charm, or at least bewilder into agreement. Despite his shaky arithmetic, Columbus honed a talent for persuasion that would make even the most seasoned salespeople take notes. He had the uncanny ability to convince people that his dreams weren't just dreams, but rather inevitable realities. This was a man who could sell ice to an Eskimo, or more fittingly, a transatlantic expedition to a skeptical monarch. By his late teens, Columbus had traded the loom for the sea, starting his career on merchant ships. The Mediterranean was his classroom, and the lessons were harsh. He witnessed firsthand the lucrative spice trade and the fierce competition for new routes. This exposure only fueled his ambition. Columbus was the kind of guy who saw a shipwreck as a stepping stone rather than a setback. But let's pause for a moment to appreciate the delicious irony of it all. Here was a man whose understanding of geography was, let's say, optimistic at best. He famously underestimated the Earth's circumference, believing it to be about 25% smaller than it actually was. If the Earth were a pizza, Columbus thought he was just a slice away from Asia. Despite such miscalculations, Columbus had a stubborn streak that could put a mule to shame. This tenacity, or perhaps sheer obstinacy, was what ultimately kept him going when others might have thrown in the towel. He wasn't just chasing maps, he was chasing destiny. As Columbus matured, so did his grandiose visions. He began to craft a narrative that merged religious zeal with economic ambition. In an era dominated by the Catholic Church, he pitched his voyages not just as quests for gold and glory, but as missions to spread Christianity. Talk about knowing your audience. But before he could set sail, Columbus needed backing. And let's be clear, he was asking for a lot. Ships, men, and provisions didn't come cheap, and he wasn't exactly offering a money-back guarantee. So he took his pitch on the road, or rather across the seas, to the courts of Europe. This is where Columbus's silver tongue really shone. He spent years lobbying, facing rejection after rejection. Portugal turned him down, and England and France were lukewarm at best. But Columbus had an ace up his sleeve, Spain. Fresh off the Reconquista in 1492, King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella of Spain were in a mood to celebrate and to expand their empire. They were the power couple of Europe, and Columbus played to their ambitions like a maestro. Now, the Spanish court wasn't entirely sold at first. Columbus's demands were steep: titles of nobility, governorship of new lands, and a cut of the profits. You'd think he was auditioning for a reality show about the world's most ambitious explorers. But after much negotiation, and probably a little eye-rolling, the Spanish monarchs finally agreed to fund his voyage. It was a high-stakes gamble, but Columbus had convinced them it was a bet worth taking. And so, Columbus, with his flawed maps and unwavering confidence, was set to embark on a journey that would change the world, even if not quite in the way he imagined. Little did he know that his path to the New World would be paved with controversy, misunderstanding, and unintended consequences. But for now, he was ready to set sail, armed with dreams bigger than the ocean itself. So, with the ink barely dry on his contract, and the weight of Spain's hopes strapped to his back, Columbus was ready to embark on what he saw as a surefire path to the riches of the East. But before we get lost in the romanticism of sails unfurling against the dawn, let's take a step back and talk logistics. Because, spoiler alert, the road to glory isn't paved with good intentions alone. It's built on cold, hard cash, and a fair share of bureaucratic wrangling. First off, let's talk numbers. Columbus's expedition wasn't some weekend fishing trip. It was a full-blown enterprise with costs that would make a modern startup blush. The Spanish crown agreed to foot the bill for 3 ships, the Niña, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria. These weren't the majestic galleons you might imagine, but rather modest caravels and a larger, slower cargo ship. The Santa Maria, Columbus's flagship, was about 70 feet long and could carry roughly 40 crew members. Not exactly a luxury liner, but it would have to do. The total cost of the expedition was about 2 million maravedis, a currency that sounds like it belongs in a fantasy novel, but was very real to the Spanish treasury. For context, that's roughly the annual income of a small noble family. Spain's rulers, King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella, weren't just throwing money around on a whim. They were fresh off the Reconquista, having just driven the Moors out of Granada, and were eager to flex their newfound unity and power. The idea of outflanking Portugal and finding a direct route to Asia was tantalizing enough to loosen their purse strings. Now, let's address the elephant in the room, or rather, the kraken in the ocean. Contrary to popular belief, Columbus's crew weren't quaking in their boots over sea monsters. The real monsters they feared were much more mundane: starvation, scurvy, and the ever-looming specter of mutiny. These sailors were veterans of the sea, and they knew the true dangers were the ones you couldn't see until it was too late. The Atlantic was an uncharted frontier, a vast and intimidating expanse that seemed to stretch into infinity. The fear wasn't of falling off the edge of the world. Most educated Europeans had accepted the earth was round, but of venturing into the unknown without enough food or fresh water. The ships were stocked with hardtack, salted meat, and barrels of wine and water, but the supplies were as finite as their patience. Columbus had estimated the journey would take a few weeks, but his miscalculations meant they were sailing into the great unknown with a ticking clock. Columbus, ever the salesman, had promised his crew riches and adventure, but he also had to maintain a tight grip on morale. It was a delicate balance between inspiring confidence and suppressing dissent, a task that required all the charm and stubbornness he could muster. In an era where mutiny could mean a quick and brutal end, Columbus had to ensure his crew remained focused on the promise of new lands and the wealth they believed awaited them. Back in Spain, Ferdinand and Isabella weren't just passively waiting for a return on their investment. The political landscape was a chessboard, and the New World was a piece they couldn't afford to lose. Portugal had already established a foothold in Africa and was eyeing the Indian Ocean, and Spain was eager to counter with its own claim to fame. Columbus's voyage was a gamble, yes, but it was also a statement of intent, that Spain was ready to play in the big leagues of exploration and empire building. But here's the kicker. Columbus's pitch wasn't just about spices and silk. He had woven a narrative that spoke to the heart of the Spanish monarchs. He painted himself as a crusader, a man on a mission to spread Christianity to the far corners of the globe. In an age where faith and power were intertwined like vines on a trellis, this was music to the ears of Ferdinand and Isabella. They saw Columbus as a means to expand not only their economic influence, but their spiritual reach as well. As Columbus set sail on August 3, 1492, from the port of Palos de la Frontera, he was carrying not just the hopes of a nation, but the weight of his own ambition. The stakes were high, and the odds were stacked against him. But Columbus, ever the optimist, believed in his destiny with a fervor that bordered on fanaticism. It was this unyielding belief that would see him through the storms and trials to come, even as the reality of his journey began to diverge from the legend he had so carefully crafted. And so, with the wind at his back and the horizon stretching endlessly before him, Columbus set out on a voyage that would alter the course of history. But as we all know, history has a way of surprising even the most prepared among us. The true adventure, it seemed, was only just beginning. And just like that, Columbus and his crew were off, chasing the horizon on what can only be described as a glorified guesswork expedition. The Atlantic was vast and unforgiving, but our man Columbus had an idea, or at least he thought he did. He was convinced that Asia was just a stone's throw across the ocean, a breezy jaunt westward. What Columbus lacked in navigational accuracy, he more than made up for in sheer audacity. The first few weeks at sea were relatively uneventful, by which I mean the crew wasn't yet contemplating mutiny. They sailed under the banner of Spain, the red and gold snapping in the wind as the Niña, Pinta, and Santa Maria cut through the waves. Columbus had promised his men riches beyond their wildest dreams, but as the days dragged on, the only treasure they discovered was the monotony of the open sea. Now, it's worth noting that Columbus wasn't exactly the picture of calm, collected leadership. His management style was, let's say, improvisational. When the crew grew restless, he juggled promises and threats like a seasoned circus performer. It was a precarious balancing act, keeping morale afloat while also maintaining the illusion of knowing precisely where they were headed. In reality, Columbus's map was about as useful as a chocolate teapot. After more than a month at sea, tensions began to simmer. The crew's faith in Columbus's compass was waning faster than their wine rations. They started murmuring about turning back, whispers of mutiny floating through the salty air. Columbus, ever the silver-tongued devil, managed to keep the rebellion at bay with a combination of charisma and sheer stubbornness. He assured them that land was near, though he had no more evidence for this than a child promising there's a candy store just around the corner. Then, on October 12, 1492, a shout from the Pinta's lookout shattered the monotony. Tierra, tierra, land had been spotted, and just like that, Columbus's gamble paid off, sort of. They had reached the Bahamas, though Columbus was blissfully unaware. He was certain he'd hit the jackpot, believing he was in Asia's outer islands. Asia, Bahamas, potato, right. Upon landing, Columbus and his crew were greeted by the indigenous Lucayan people. The cultural exchange that followed was, to put it mildly, a comedy of errors. Columbus's diaries reveal a man both bewildered and bemused by the customs of these so-called Indians. He was convinced he'd stumbled upon the fringes of the East Indies, and nothing short of a world map smacking him in the face would convince him otherwise. Columbus, in his misguided benevolence, was quick to note the innocence of the locals, which he interpreted as a golden opportunity for conversion and exploitation, two sides of the same colonial coin. He marveled at their lack of iron and weaponry, seeing it as an invitation for European superiority. The locals, on the other hand, probably saw Columbus and his men as oddities, wrapped in strange fabrics and babbling in an incomprehensible tongue. The first interactions were a surreal blend of curiosity and confusion. Columbus offered trinkets in exchange for information about gold, while the Lucayans likely wondered what kind of fool would trade shiny beads for valuable resources. It was the beginning of a relationship fraught with misunderstanding and exploitation, a tragic prologue to the chapters of colonization that would follow. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. For now, Columbus was riding high on the success of his discovery. He hopped from island to island, convinced that he was skirting the edges of the Asian continent. Every new landfall was meticulously documented, each interaction with the indigenous people noted with the curious eye of a man who believed he was on the brink of a new world order. Yet, the reality was far from the fantasy Columbus had spun. The islands were beautiful, yes, but they were not the spice-laden lands he had promised the Spanish crown. The gold he sought was scarce, and the riches of Asia remained a mirage on the horizon. Still, Columbus persisted, driven by a mix of ambition and desperation. In his mind, he was a hero, a trailblazer charting the unknown. But to his crew, he was a captain with questionable navigation skills and an uncanny ability to spin any situation to his advantage. His leadership was a cocktail of bravado and bluster, with just enough success to keep the dream alive. As the weeks turned into months, Columbus's fleet pressed on, exploring the Caribbean with the zeal of a man convinced he was on the brink of legendary fame. Each island was a new chapter in his grand narrative, each encounter a step closer to his vision of glory. But beneath the surface, the cracks were beginning to show. The harsh realities of the voyage were becoming more apparent. The initial euphoria of landfall had given way to the gritty business of survival. Supplies were dwindling, and the tropical climate was a far cry from the temperate shores of Spain. Disease and exhaustion were constant companions, lurking in the shadows of every cove and inlet. Columbus's leadership was tested as never before. He was forced to navigate not only the treacherous waters of the Caribbean, but the increasingly precarious morale of his crew. His grandiose promises were wearing thin, and the men were growing weary of chasing dreams across an endless sea. The cultural misunderstandings with the indigenous peoples only added to the tension. Columbus's attempts at diplomacy were often clumsy, rooted in his own Eurocentric worldview. He saw himself as a bringer of civilization, yet his actions laid the groundwork for a legacy of exploitation and conquest. And so, as the year drew to a close, Columbus found himself at a crossroads. He had achieved what many believed impossible. He had crossed the Atlantic and returned with tales of new lands. But the journey had taken its toll, both on the men who followed him and on the world he had begun to unravel. As the ships prepared to return to Spain, Columbus's thoughts turned to the future. He had tasted the thrill of discovery, and he was eager for more. The new world was a canvas on which he could paint his legacy, a stage for the drama of exploration and empire. But the story was far from over. Columbus's first voyage was only the beginning, a prologue to the epic saga of contact and conflict that would shape the history of the Americas. The myths and legends he had crafted were only just beginning to take root, their tendrils creeping into the annals of history. With the horizon once again calling, Columbus set his sights on returning to Spain, eager to share his findings and secure his place in the pantheon of explorers. But as he sailed back across the Atlantic, he carried with him more than just the tales of his journey. He carried the seeds of an era, an age of exploration that would change the world in ways he could scarcely imagine. And so, as the sails filled with the wind of destiny, Columbus's voyage came to a temporary end. But the echoes of his journey would resonate far beyond the shores of Spain, reverberating through the corridors of time, shaping the course of history in ways both wondrous and tragic. As Columbus's ships made their way back to Spain, the horizon brimming with the possibilities of the New World, little did he know that his return would set off a chain reaction that would echo across Europe like a cannon blast. News of his voyage spread faster than a modern-day tweet, and soon Columbus found himself at the center of a flurry of excitement, speculation, and good old-fashioned myth-making. Upon his arrival in Spain in March 1493, the reception was nothing short of triumphant. Picture the medieval equivalent of a ticker-tape parade, minus the confetti. King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella were eager to hear tales of Columbus's discoveries, hoping he would confirm their dreams of a direct route to Asia, brimming with spices and silk. But instead of the riches of Cathay, Columbus brought back tales of lush islands and friendly natives, along with a smattering of gold trinkets and a handful of captives who were paraded as exotic proof of his success. The Spanish court was abuzz, and Columbus was hailed as a hero, an explorer who had opened the door to a new world of opportunities. The myth-making machine went into overdrive. Pamphlets and letters circulated, painting Columbus as a visionary who had dared to venture where others had not. It's like he was the rock star of the age of discovery, his voyages romanticized and celebrated in a way that glossed over the more uncomfortable truths. Now, let's sprinkle in a bit of economic context, because, after all, this wasn't just about adventure. It was about cold, hard cash. The Spanish crown had invested heavily in Columbus's voyage, and they were eager for a return on their investment. The prospect of new lands meant new resources, and the possibilities for wealth were tantalizing. But Columbus's initial haul was more promise than payoff, a fact that wasn't lost on the savvy monarchs. Despite the lack of immediate riches, the potential was enough to spark a frenzy of interest. Soon, other European powers were eyeing Spain's newfound claims with envy. The news of Columbus's discoveries spread through the courts of Europe like wildfire, setting off a race to explore and colonize these mysterious new lands. Every monarch with a fleet and a few coins to rub together wanted a slice of the pie. The economic stakes were high, and Columbus's voyages had effectively thrown open the floodgates. The subsequent rush to the Americas would reshape the global economy, shifting the center of trade from the Mediterranean to the Atlantic. This was the dawn of a new era, one that would see the rise of European empires and the global exchange of goods, ideas, and, unfortunately, human lives. In the midst of all this excitement, Columbus found himself thrust into the role of governor of the new territories. But here's where the romantic narrative takes a nosedive. Columbus, the explorer, and Columbus, the administrator, were two vastly different beasts. Managing a colony required a skill set that Columbus, with his penchant for audacious dreams and questionable navigation, simply didn't possess. His leadership style, which had barely held a ship's crew together, was ill-suited for the complexities of colonial governance. The harsh realities of colonization soon reared their ugly heads. Columbus's interactions with the indigenous peoples were marked by a mix of naivety and exploitation. He saw the native populations as subjects to be converted and resources to be exploited. The encomienda system was established under his watch, a brutal labor arrangement that saw natives forced into servitude under the guise of protection and religious instruction. It was a system fraught with abuse, setting a precedent for the exploitation that would characterize much of the colonial era. Spanish settlers, hungry for land and wealth, quickly followed in Columbus's wake, each with their own dreams of fortune. The establishment of Spanish colonies in the Caribbean marked the beginning of a new chapter in the history of the Americas, one that would see the displacement and decimation of indigenous cultures. The myths of noble explorers and untapped paradises began to crumble under the weight of reality. Yet, back in Europe, the legend of Columbus continued to grow. The Spanish monarchy, keen to maintain their hold on the new territories, fueled the narrative of Columbus as a brave pioneer. His image was polished and presented to the world, a beacon of Spanish ambition and ingenuity. The controversies and failures of his governance were brushed aside, inconvenient truths swept under the rug of national pride. Columbus's return voyages to the New World were marked by increasing challenges and diminishing returns. The initial excitement gave way to the gritty business of empire building, and Columbus's star began to wane. The Spanish crown, once eager patrons, grew wary of his demands and disappointed by the lack of substantial wealth. The sheen of heroism began to tarnish as the realities of colonization took their toll. Despite the controversies, the myth of Columbus as a hero of exploration endured. His voyages were celebrated as the dawn of a new age, a narrative that glossed over the darker aspects of his legacy. The harsh treatment of natives and the establishment of exploitative systems were overshadowed by the romanticized tales of discovery and adventure. But history, as we know, is rarely black and white. Columbus was a man of his time, driven by ambition and blinded by his own convictions. His voyages opened the door to a new world, but they also unleashed a tide of consequences that would shape the future of the Americas. As the story of Columbus unfolded, the world was forever changed. The age of exploration was underway, a period of unprecedented contact and conflict that would redefine the boundaries of the known world. Columbus's legacy is a tangled web of achievement and atrocity, a reminder that history is often written in shades of gray. And so, as we delve deeper into the aftermath of Columbus's discoveries, we find ourselves navigating the complex waters of myth and reality. The story of Columbus is far from over, and as we explore the chapters yet to come, we'll uncover the lasting impact of his voyages on the world stage. Stay tuned, because the saga of exploration, colonization, and the inexorable march of history is just beginning to unfold. As the legend of Christopher Columbus continued to swirl with the vigor of a hurricane, the reality of his later years was a far cry from the triumphant parades and royal accolades. By the time he returned to the New World for his third voyage in 1498, the sheen of his earlier discoveries had dulled, and the Spanish crown's patience was wearing thinner than a sailor's ration of hardtack. Let's dive into the economic undercurrent of Columbus's expeditions. Initially, his voyages were the investment of the century, promising untold riches and a fast track to Asia's treasures. But as it turns out, the New World wasn't exactly a gold-dipped paradise. Sure, there was some gold, but not the mountains Columbus had promised. And as the Spanish monarchy started crunching the numbers, they realized they needed a return on their investment, not just tales of exotic islands and a few shiny trinkets. By the late 1490, Columbus was feeling the heat. His governance of the new territories was, to put it mildly, a disaster. Imagine a juggling act where none of the balls are actually in the air. That was Columbus trying to manage the colonies. His administration was marred by mismanagement, and the settlers were about as happy as a cat in a bathtub. Reports of tyranny and incompetence reached the ears of Ferdinand and Isabella, who were hoping for a well-oiled colonial machine and instead got the equivalent of a rusted bicycle. In 1500, the Spanish crown finally decided enough was enough. They sent Francisco de Bobadilla, a royal commissioner, to investigate the murky goings-on in the colonies. Bobadilla arrived in Hispaniola like a no-nonsense sheriff, in a lawless Wild West town. What he found was a chaotic scene of discontent and disorder. Columbus and his brothers were arrested and sent back to Spain in chains, a humiliation that must have felt like a slap in the face from Lady Fortune herself. But don't feel too sorry for him just yet. Columbus's fall from grace was a classic tale of hubris meeting reality. His vision of the New World was as much a fantasy as his belief that he'd found a shortcut to Asia. The Spanish crown stripped him of his titles, and while he was eventually released and allowed to return to the Americas, the damage was done. Columbus's star had fallen, and the romantic vision of the noble explorer was starting to tarnish. Now, let's talk long-term effects, because this is where the real story gets gritty. Columbus's voyages kicked off the Columbian Exchange, a monumental swap of crops, animals, and unfortunately, diseases between the Old and New Worlds. Think of it as history's most significant and consequential cultural exchange program. Europe got tomatoes, potatoes, and chocolate, while the Americas received horses, wheat, and smallpox, a trade-off that was decidedly one-sided in terms of human cost. The indigenous populations were devastated by diseases to which they had no immunity, leading to a catastrophic decline in their numbers. Economically, Columbus's voyages shifted the axis of trade from the Mediterranean to the Atlantic, a pivot that reshaped global commerce. The riches of the Americas, once tapped by subsequent explorers and conquistadors, fueled European economies and financed the rise of powerful empires. The Old World order was upended, and the New World became the stage for a drama of colonization and conquest that would unfold over the next several centuries. But back to Columbus, the man and the myth. Even as the reality of his exploits became more apparent, the legend persisted. The image of Columbus as a daring explorer who bridged two worlds became a cornerstone of Western narrative. The myth endured because it was useful, a symbol of exploration, ambition, and the indomitable human spirit. It was easier to celebrate Columbus as a hero than to confront the uncomfortable truths of his legacy. In his later years, Columbus lobbied hard to regain his titles and the wealth he believed was owed to him. Despite his diminished status, he managed to undertake a fourth voyage in 1502, still chasing the elusive passage to Asia. But this final journey was fraught with hardship, storms, shipwrecks, and hostile encounters with indigenous peoples. Columbus was marooned in Jamaica for over a year, an unceremonious end to his once dazzling career on the high seas. Columbus returned to Spain in 1504, his health failing and his dreams of glory all but extinguished. He died 2 years later in 1506, largely forgotten by the court that had once lauded him as a hero. And yet, as we know, death is rarely the end for those whose names are etched into history's ledger. The dual nature of Columbus's legacy is a testament to the complexity of history itself. On one hand, he's celebrated as a visionary who opened the door to the New World, a figure whose tenacity and daring are undeniable. On the other, his voyages set the stage for exploitation and colonization that wreaked havoc on indigenous populations and reshaped entire continents. Today, Columbus's legacy is a hotly debated topic, emblematic of the tension between myth and reality. Statues of Columbus stand in cities across the Americas, monuments to a man whose story is both celebrated and condemned. The romanticized vision of Columbus as a brave explorer is juxtaposed against the stark realities of colonization and its impact, an uncomfortable truth that demands acknowledgement and reflection. And so, as we wrap up this saga, we're left with a story that is as multifaceted as it is fascinating. Columbus was neither saint nor sinner, but a man of his time, a time when the world was ripe for exploration, yet unprepared for the consequences that followed. His voyages were the catalyst for an age of discovery and conquest, a reminder of the human capacity for both greatness and folly. In the end, the story of Christopher Columbus is a mirror reflecting the complexities of human ambition. It's a tale of dreams and disappointments, of myths and realities intertwined like the strands of a sailor's rope. And as we continue to navigate the waters of history, his legacy remains a potent reminder of the dual nature of exploration, the promise of new horizons, and the shadows that lurk just beyond the edge of the map. In the small Tuscan town of Vinci, The kind of place where everyone knows your business before you even do. A baby named Leonardo was born on April 15, 1452. Now, if you're thinking he sprang into existence with a paintbrush in one hand and a sketchbook full of helicopter designs in the other, dial it down a notch. Leonardo's early years weren't a parade of artistic triumphs, but a testament to the unpredictable nature of genius. Leonardo was the illegitimate son of a notary named Sir Pirro and a peasant woman named Caterina. Picture the scandal, a respectable notary and a country girl. In a time when social status was as rigid as the Florentine skyline, being born out of wedlock could have clipped Leonardo's wings before he ever got the chance to soar. Yet, in a stroke of luck, or perhaps a testament to the family's pragmatism, his father took responsibility. Leonardo was raised in his father's household, a mix of privilege and the oddball freedom that comes with not fitting neatly into societal boxes. Fast forward to his teenage years, and Leonardo found himself in Florence, a city so vibrant that even its shadows seemed to hum with creativity. Here, he began an apprenticeship under Andrea del Verrocchio, a man whose name sounds like he might moonlight as a Renaissance wrestler. Verrocchio was a master in his own right, a jack of all trades who dabbled in painting, sculpture, and goldsmithing. Under his tutelage, Leonardo learned the ropes, or more accurately, the brushstrokes of art. Now, here's where it gets juicy. Legend has it that Leonardo's talent was so intimidating that Verrocchio, upon seeing his apprentice's contribution to a joint painting, vowed never to pick up a brush again. That might be a bit of an exaggeration, but let's face it, the Renaissance loved a good dramatic flair almost as much as it loved frescoes. But Leonardo wasn't just about painting cherubs and biblical scenes with photorealistic precision. His mind was a restless, insatiable beast, always itching for the next big thing. During his time in Florence, young Leonardo developed an obsession with flight. This wasn't your standard, "Oh, look at the birds, aren't they nice?" kind of fascination. No, Leonardo wanted to become a human bird. He filled pages with sketches of flying machines, contraptions that looked like the fever dreams of a steampunk enthusiast. His notebooks were littered with designs for ornithopters, devices meant to mimic the flapping of wings. Sure, they never quite got off the ground, but can you blame him for dreaming big, while most teenagers of his era were busy figuring out how to avoid the plague or where to find the best spot to watch public executions? Leonardo was dissecting animals to understand their anatomy. Heartwarming, right? But this wasn't some morbid hobby. Leonardo was driven by a quest for knowledge that knew no bounds. He believed that understanding the intricacies of muscles and bones was crucial for portraying the human body in art. This was revolutionary. Most artists of the time were content with drawing people who looked like their arms were made of spaghetti and couldn't care less about anatomical accuracy. Leonardo's anatomical sketches were so detailed that they could put modern medical textbooks to shame. It's like he had X-ray vision centuries before Superman made it cool. He examined everything from the human heart to the muscles of a horse, trying to decode the mysteries of nature. And if that meant poking around a few corpses, well, he wasn't squeamish about it. He once wrote, "I have been impressed with the urgency of doing. Knowing is not enough, we must apply. Being willing is not enough, we must do." Talk about a Renaissance work ethic. Despite his unconventional pursuits, Leonardo remained tethered to the world of art, which, let's be honest, was probably a relief to those around him who didn't quite understand his fascination with dissecting frogs. His time with Verrocchio laid the foundation for his artistic legacy, but it was his insatiable curiosity that set him apart. He was less interested in following the rules and more inclined to break them, which, in Renaissance Italy, was as risky as juggling knives while blindfolded. Leonardo's early life was a cocktail of circumstances that could have gone horribly wrong, but somehow aligned just right. His illegitimacy, which could have consigned him to obscurity, instead offered him a unique perspective. The lack of formal constraints meant he could explore the world with a freedom that was rare for his time. And while he might not have invented the airplane, his sketches ignited imaginations for generations to come. As for his art, well, it was just the beginning. The world was about to see what the ultimate Renaissance multitasker could do, and trust me, the best was yet to come. As Leonardo packed his bags and took his talents from Florence to Milan in 1482, he stepped into a world of opportunity. Milan, under the rule of Ludovico Sforza, nicknamed Il Moro, not for anything horticultural, but for his dark complexion, was a bustling hub of innovation and intrigue. If Florence was the artistic soul of Italy, Milan was its engineering brain, and Leonardo was about to give it a jolt of genius. Just like any modern-day job seeker, Leonardo came armed with a resume. Except his wasn't a LinkedIn profile. It was a letter to Ludovico that boasted of his skills in engineering, architecture, and almost as an afterthought, painting. Talk about burying the lead. But Ludovico, in need of military engineers, was intrigued by Leonardo's promise of designing bridges, cannons, and why not, a bit of hydraulic engineering on the side. Let's face it, in Renaissance Italy, everyone needed a good moat. While Leonardo's workshop was soon brimming with blueprints and gadgets, one of his most famous projects was a giant bronze horse, commissioned by Ludovico as a tribute to his father. This was no pony-sized endeavor. Standing tall at 24 feet, the horse was to be the largest equestrian statue ever created. The design was ambitious, the plans were elaborate, and the execution, well, let's just say it was more of a trail ride than a Kentucky Derby. Leonardo spent about 17 years on this project. Yes, you heard right, 17. By the time he was ready to cast the statue, he had accumulated 70 tons of bronze. But here's the kicker. Before the horse could see the light of day, those pesky French decided Milan would be a lovely vacation spot and invaded in 1499. Ludovico was ousted, the bronze was repurposed into cannons, and Leonardo's magnificent horse was left as nothing but a collection of sketches and a colossal clay model which the French troops used for target practice. Sometimes, history is more oops than aha. Meanwhile, Leonardo had another masterpiece in the works, The Last Supper, painted for the refectory of the convent of Santa Maria del Grazie in Milan. Now, you might think a fresco of this stature would be executed with a tried-and-true method, but Leonardo had a penchant for experimentation. Instead of the classic fresco technique that involved painting on wet plaster, Leonardo opted for a dry plaster approach. The result? A masterpiece that began to flake before the paint even dried. Talk about a non-stick surface. Commissioned around 1495, The Last Supper took Leonardo about 3 years to complete, which, given his track record, is practically breakneck speed. Yet, for all its technical flaws, the painting was revolutionary. Leonardo captured the moment of shock among the apostles as Jesus announced that one of them would betray him. The composition, the use of light and shadow, and the psychological depth were unprecedented. It's like he took a snapshot of human emotion centuries before photography was a thing. But let's not romanticize too much. The convent wasn't thrilled with the delay, and the prior reportedly complained that Leonardo spent more time pondering his work than actually painting. Leonardo famously quipped that he needed to observe the expressions of men across Milan to capture Judas' treachery. Whether that was true or just a clever deflection, it's hard to say, but it certainly kept the prior off his back. When it came to engineering, Leonardo's mind was a whirlwind of innovation, though not without its fair share of head-scratchers. He sketched designs for everything from a mechanical knight, yes, a robot, to a machine for testing the tensile strength of wire. His notebooks were filled with ideas that ranged from the genius to the downright wacky. Take his design for a giant crossbow, like catapult your enemies to Timbuktu giant. It was a marvel of engineering, but in practice, it likely would have been about as useful as a chocolate teapot. Despite the setbacks and unfulfilled projects, Leonardo's stint in Milan was a period of immense growth and creativity. It was a time when his insatiable curiosity led him not just to paint and sculpt, but to explore the very mechanics of the world around him. Whether he was sketching the swirling patterns of water or devising a new musical instrument, he was always pushing the boundaries of what was possible. Leonardo's Milanese years were a dance between triumph and frustration, a testament to the capricious nature of innovation. He was a man ahead of his time, constrained by the limits of his era, but unfettered in imagination. It's easy to see why his story has captured the imagination of generations. Yet, for all the romance and mythologizing, the reality is that Leonardo was human, brilliant, flawed, and endlessly fascinating. And as he packed up and left Milan in the wake of the French invasion, the world was left with a legacy that was both incomplete and immeasurable. But the story, like all good tales, was far from over. As Leonardo bid adieu to Milan, his luggage stuffed with unfulfilled dreams and a few too many sketches of imaginary machines, he found himself in a bit of a pickle. You see, the French invasion had left his patron, Ludovico Sforza, packing faster than you can say regime change, and Leonardo was suddenly a man without a court. But let's not weep for our Renaissance hero just yet. If there's one thing Leonardo knew how to do, it was to land on his feet, or at the very least, sketch a device that might help him do so. His next stop, Venice. Ah, Venice, the city of canals, romance, and in Leonardo's time, a strategic military position that was as coveted as a slice of tiramisu at a potluck. Now, Venice wasn't just a picturesque backdrop for gondola rides. It was a bustling republic with its eyes peeled for military innovation. Leonardo, ever the opportunist, pitched his services to the Venetian government with the enthusiasm of a modern-day startup founder. Forget killer apps. Leonardo offered the Venetians killer defenses, including a plan to create a dam system that could flood enemy ships attempting to invade via the lagoon. It sounds like a Bond villain's plot, doesn't it? But in a city built on water, it was just crazy enough to work. Alas, Venice wasn't quite ready to embrace Leonardo's grand designs. His plans were admired, perhaps, but not implemented. It was a classic case of great idea, wrong time, a theme that seemed to follow Leonardo like a shadow. So, after a brief Venetian interlude, Leonardo was on the move again, this time heading back to the familiar streets of Florence. But this wasn't the Florence of his youth. The city was now a hotbed of artistic rivalry and political maneuvering, with Leonardo soon finding himself face to face with the formidable force of nature that was Michelangelo Buonarroti. Now, if the Renaissance had a version of a celebrity feud, this was it. Picture Leonardo and Michelangelo as the 16th century equivalent of an epic rap battle, complete with artistic shade and creative one-upmanship. Leonardo, with his endless curiosity and aversion to finishing projects, was the antithesis of Michelangelo, whose relentless focus and sculpting prowess made him a force to be reckoned with. Their rivalry was as juicy as a Florentine steak, and the city buzzed with tales of their clash. The animosity between the two geniuses was as palpable as the frescoes on the walls of the Palazzo Vecchio, where they were both commissioned to paint murals. Leonardo was tasked with portraying the Battle of Anghiari, while Michelangelo was to depict the Battle of Cassina. It was the Renaissance equivalent of a paint-off, a battle of brushstrokes where only one masterpiece would reign supreme. Except, in true Leonardo fashion, his mural never saw the light of day. Experimented with a new technique involving wax and fire, which sounds more like a recipe for a candle than a fresco, and the project literally melted away. But let's not get too hung up on Leonardo's artistic setbacks because, during this time, he was also working on a little painting that would become the most famous smile in history, the Mona Lisa. Now, here's where we get to do some myth-busting. Today, the Mona Lisa is an icon, a cultural touchstone, the face that launched 1,000 memes. But during Leonardo's lifetime, it was just another portrait. Commissioned by a wealthy silk merchant named Francesco del Giocondo, it was a portrait of his wife, Lisa Gherardini. Leonardo took his time with this one, 4 years to be exact, adding layer upon layer of delicate glazes to create that enigmatic expression that seems to follow you around the room. Yet, despite its eventual fame, the Mona Lisa wasn't an overnight sensation. It didn't hang in a grand palace or become the centerpiece of a royal collection. No, Leonardo took it with him when he left Florence for France, adding it to his personal collection. It wasn't until centuries later, after a little incident involving theft from the Louvre in 1911, that the Mona Lisa skyrocketed to fame. Leave it to a good art heist to make people pay attention. But let's get back to Leonardo's notebooks, those chaotic repositories of genius that reveal a mind as scattered as it was brilliant. His journals were a mishmash of sketches, observations, and musings that spanned everything from anatomy to astronomy. They're like the Renaissance version of the Internet, a little bit of everything, all jumbled together with no clear order. 1 minute, he's diagramming the muscles of the human face. The next, he's sketching a design for a flying machine or jotting down a recipe for a hair dye. Talk about multitasking. In those pages, we find a man who was captivated by the world in all its complexity. Leonardo's notebooks reveal a relentless curiosity and a refusal to accept the status quo. He questioned everything, from the movement of water to the nature of light, and sought to understand the underlying principles governing the natural world. It's here, in these scribbled notes and sketches, that we find the true essence of Leonardo, a man who saw connections where others saw chaos, who found beauty in the mechanics of the universe. For all his genius, Leonardo was also a product of his time, navigating a world of patronage and politics, where art was as much about survival as it was about creativity. His wanderings from court to court, from Milan to Venice to Florence and beyond, were driven by a need for both financial support and intellectual freedom. In a world where a single misstep could cost you your livelihood, or worse, Leonardo's ability to adapt and innovate was not just a skill, it was a necessity. As Leonardo's story unfolds, we see a man who was as much a dreamer as he was a doer, whose legacy is as much about the questions he asked as the answers he found. His rivalry with Michelangelo may have been fueled by competition, but it also pushed both artists to new heights, challenging them to redefine the possibilities of art. And while the Mona Lisa's smile may have taken centuries to capture the world's imagination, it stands as a testament to Leonardo's enduring influence. So, as we leave Leonardo in Florence, juggling his artistic ambitions with his scientific explorations, we're reminded that the path of genius is rarely straight and never simple. It's a winding road filled with detours, dead ends, and moments of sheer brilliance. And for Leonardo, the journey was far from over. As he packed his bags once more, setting off for new horizons, the world was left to wonder what this restless mind would conceive next. Stay tuned, because the story's about to take another fascinating turn. And so, Leonardo's journey continued, this time leading him to the eternal city, Rome. Now, Rome in the early 16th century was a bit like Leonardo himself, bursting with ambition, a tad chaotic, and perpetually under construction. The city was bustling with artists and architects brought in by the papacy to glorify the church, which meant Leonardo was stepping into a Renaissance pressure cooker. Pope Leo X, a Medici and no stranger to artistic flair, had his eyes set on making Rome the cultural capital of the world. While Michelangelo and Raphael were busy painting ceilings and crafting masterpieces, Leonardo was less about the brushwork and more about what made people tick. Literally. In Rome, Leonardo's obsession with anatomy reached new heights or depths, depending on how you look at it. At a time when dissecting human bodies was frowned upon, or, banned by the church, Leonardo was sneaking into morgues like a kid sneaking into a movie theater. With scalpel in hand, he peeled back the layers of human mystery, documenting everything with a precision that would make a modern surgeon jealous. His sketches from this period read like a medical textbook that was centuries ahead of its time. Forget Google. Leonardo was the OG search engine for anatomy. But as always, Leonardo's interests were as scattered as a bag of marbles on a downhill slope. While he was in Rome, he also dabbled in designing a new kind of waterway, dreaming up a plan for a city powered by renewable energy, and even inventing musical instruments. It's like his brain was hosting a Renaissance TED talk, except the audience was just him and the occasional apprentice. Despite his genius, though, Leonardo didn't quite fit into the papal plans. His refusal to toe the line or focus solely on art projects left him on the fringes of Rome's artistic elite. You could say he was the Renaissance version of the kid who eats lunch alone because he's too busy doodling rocket ships and rewriting the rules of physics. But even geniuses need patrons, and Leonardo was about to find one of the most enthusiastic in King Francis I of France. In 1516, at the ripe age of 64, Leonardo packed his bags for the French court, leaving behind the intrigue of Italy for what would be his final chapter. Francis I, a Francophile long before it was cool, was a Renaissance man in spirit and a Leonardo fanboy in practice. He scooped up Leonardo like a collector acquiring a rare baseball card, giving him a cushy position as premier painter and engineer and architect to the king, which sounds like a mouthful, but essentially meant Leonardo got to do whatever tickled his fancy. In France, Leonardo settled at the Château du Clos Lucé, stone's throw from the king's residence in Amboise. It was a sweet gig, a manor house with a workshop, a salary of 1,000 gold crowns per year, and all the time in the world to tinker with his inventions and theories. Picture Leonardo in a kind of retirement before retirement was a thing, but instead of golfing, He was building hydraulic pumps and designing mechanical lions that could walk and roar. Yes, a robotic lion. Why? Because he could. Despite his age, Leonardo's curiosity never wavered. He continued to fill pages with sketches and ideas, from the practical to the bizarre. One of his less successful, but wildly creative, inventions was a plan for a giant mechanical knight that could sit, wave its arms, and open its mouth. It sounds like the kind of thing you'd see at a medieval theme park, but in Leonardo's hands, it was a testament to his boundless imagination. However, let's debunk a myth that's as persistent as Leonardo's own tenacity. The notion of him as a solitary genius, a lone wolf howling at the moon of innovation. While it's tempting to picture Leonardo as a singular force of creativity, the truth is he thrived in a collaborative environment. His workshop was a hive of activity, buzzing with apprentices and fellow thinkers who contributed to and learned from his work. Leonardo was a maestro, but his symphony was composed with many hands. This communal spirit was crucial, for it was in dialogue with others that Leonardo's ideas flourished. And then there's the anatomy of his social connections. Leonardo was adept at navigating the patronage system, which was as much about who you knew as what you could do. His relationships with powerful patrons like Francis I were not just about financial support. They were about having the freedom to explore his myriad interests. In many ways, Leonardo was as much a diplomat as he was an artist, maneuvering through the political landscapes of Italy and France with the agility of a tightrope walker. As the sun began to set on Leonardo's life, his health started to wane. He suffered from paralysis in his right hand, which, thankfully, didn't impede his ability to sketch or write, as he was left-handed. Despite this, his mind remained as sharp as ever, continuing to explore the world's mysteries with the zest of a man half his age. On May 2, 1519, at the age of 67, Leonardo da Vinci passed away in the arms of the French king, or so the story goes. Whether or not Francis was actually present is up for debate, but the image is fitting. A final salute to a man whose life was a canvas of curiosity and creativity. In his will, Leonardo left his manuscripts, tools, and paintings, including the Mona Lisa, to his loyal apprentice Francesco Melzi. It was a passing of the torch, a way to ensure that the light of his genius would continue to shine beyond his lifetime. And shine it did. Leonardo's legacy is a kaleidoscope of art, science, and imagination that continues to captivate us to this day. Yet, as we marvel at his achievements, it's worth remembering that Leonardo's greatness wasn't born in a vacuum, was forged in the fires of collaboration, curiosity, and a relentless drive to see the world not just as it was, but as it could be. With Leonardo's story winding down in France, the stage is set for the final act, a tale not just of a man, but of an era that was forever changed by his vision. Stay tuned, because there's more to uncover as we delve into the enduring impact of Leonardo's genius and the myths that continue to whisper through the annals of history. So, as we dive into the final chapter of Leonardo's saga, let's explore why his legacy is, quite frankly, the stuff of legends. You see, Leonardo da Vinci wasn't just your run-of-the-mill Renaissance man. He was the Renaissance man, capital R, capital M. He was like the original multitasker, long before smartphones made it easy, and his genius was about as subtle as a fireworks display at midnight. But what makes Leonardo's blend of art and science resonate through the ages? And why are we still fascinated with him like some kind of intellectual rock star? To start, let's talk about the Leonardo effect, a term that sounds like it should involve magic, but is really about inspiration. Generations of artists, scientists, and thinkers have looked to Leonardo as the ultimate example of curiosity-driven genius. From the pages of his notebooks, filled to the brim with sketches and ideas, emerged a new way of seeing the world. In the 17th century, Galileo Galilei, the man who dared to suggest that maybe the Earth wasn't the center of the universe, was influenced by Leonardo's approach to observation and experimentation. Leonardo's meticulous studies of nature, whether he was dissecting cadavers or doodling in the margins about the flight of birds, laid the groundwork for scientific inquiry. His insistence that art and science were two sides of the same coin was revolutionary, and it continues to inspire the STEAM, that's science, technology, engineering, art, and mathematics movement today. Who knew that a guy who sketched flying machines in his free time would become a patron saint of interdisciplinary education? But before we canonize Leonardo entirely, let's debunk a few myths. First off, the idea of him as a solitary genius, furrowing his brow in a candlelit room, is about as realistic as a Netflix historical drama. The truth: Leonardo was very much a product of his time, benefiting from the vibrant cultural exchanges and collaborative environments of the Renaissance. His workshop was buzzing with apprentices and fellow artists, each contributing to and learning from the collective pool of knowledge. It was a bit like a Renaissance version of a tech startup, where innovation thrived on collaboration and occasionally a little friendly competition. Leonardo's genius wasn't just in his ideas. It was in his ability to inspire others, to weave a tapestry of creativity that extended far beyond his own hands. Now, let's address the cult of Da Vinci. In the centuries following his death, Leonardo became a figure shrouded in mystique, a symbol of human potential. His name became synonymous with genius, his works revered as sacred relics. This modern obsession with Leonardo can be traced back to the 19th century, when Romanticism swept through Europe, and suddenly everyone was swooning over tortured artists and misunderstood geniuses. Leonardo's enigmatic smile in the Mona Lisa, his cryptic notes written in mirror script, and his unfinished projects became fodder for a narrative that was as much myth as it was reality. Yet, while the mythologizing of Leonardo can sometimes overshadow the man, it's also a testament to his enduring impact. After all, if we're still talking about you 500 years later, you're doing something right. Part of what makes Leonardo so captivating is his quirks, those delightful oddities that make him seem less like a marble statue and more like a real human being. For instance, Leonardo was notorious for his procrastination. The man could have given masterclasses in delay tactics. He started countless projects that he never finished, from paintings to mechanical devices, leading some to joke that his greatest masterpiece was the art of not completing things. Then there was his sense of humor, which could be as sharp as his sketches. Leonardo reportedly loved to play pranks on his friends, painting grotesque faces to startle them, or using his anatomical knowledge to create lifelike masks that would put modern special effects to shame. And let's not forget his penchant for writing in reverse, which has baffled scholars for centuries. Was it a code to keep his ideas secret, or just a left-handed quirk? The jury's still out, but it certainly adds to the mystique. As we wrap up this whirlwind tour of Leonardo's life, we're left with the ultimate question: was he more of an artist or an inventor? Well, let's not pigeonhole him. Leonardo was the embodiment of the Renaissance ideal, a polymath who refused to be confined by labels. His art was infused with scientific insight, his inventions inspired by aesthetic beauty. When you look at the Vitruvian Man, that iconic sketch of a perfectly proportioned human, you're seeing a blend of art and science so seamless it might as well be a magic trick. Leonardo's genius lay in his refusal to see boundaries between disciplines, instead viewing the world as a vast, interconnected web of wonder. In the end, Leonardo da Vinci's legacy is a testament to the power of curiosity. He reminds us that the greatest discoveries often come from asking the simplest questions, from daring to look at the familiar with fresh eyes. Whether he was concocting wild inventions or capturing the human soul on canvas, Leonardo's insatiable curiosity was his true masterpiece. And as we close the book on his story, we're reminded that the journey of discovery is never truly complete. Like Leonardo, we are all explorers, navigating the vast expanse of human knowledge with our own questions and dreams. So there you have it. Leonardo da Vinci, artist, inventor, dreamer, prankster, and eternal enigma. A man whose life was a kaleidoscope of creativity, whose legacy continues to inspire and intrigue. And as you drift off to sleep, pondering the wonders of his world, remember that the spirit of Leonardo lives on in every question you ask and every boundary you dare to cross. Sweet dreams, and may your imagination soar as high as Leonardo's flying machines.